"It's fine," Nate said. "You're getting there. That was progress." "He's right," Princess Marco said, standing a short distance away. "It'll take time to get full control over your powers, just like it'll take time for us to become full mates. And I promise, I'm more impatient about the latter," he chuckled. Nate shot him a frown and reached to rub my shoulder. "You should be proud of yourself." "Proud of myself when I couldn't even manage to get halfway to what they all did so effortlessly." I pulled away from him, scrambling to my feet. "I don't need coddling," I said. "I need to figure this out." Aaron ambled over to join us. Weston Kylie had hung back, my friend looking concerned, but uncertain this was one challenge she couldn't meet. "With me, I think you're pushing yourself too hard," Aaron said in his mild voice. The evenness of it paired with that faint rasp seemed to file down the sharp edges of my emotions. "I know some mental exercises that might help with that for the next time you try. You could take a break." "And then no break," I interrupted. "If you've got something to teach me that might help, let's do it now." He paused, but then he nodded. "All right." He glanced around at the others. "We'll need to be undisturbed for this." Marco saluted him. "Enjoy your mind games, Eagle Boy." Nate drew back, his expression worried. I didn't know what to say to him to make him feel better. My sense of failure jabbed deeper into my chest. I turned to Aaron. "Let's go." He motioned for me to follow him. At the edge of the clearing close to the village's nearest buildings, a circle of beech trees formed a small sheltered glade. We squeezed between them. Aaron sat down cross-legged in their midst, so I copied him, sitting across from him. "Is this some kind of meditation you want me to do?" I asked. "Something like that to begin with. You could focus on your breathing, feel it traveling into and out of your lungs, let it fill your chest fully before you expel. It has sense of control over it, and of how by moderating it you can moderate your emotions." Apparently he could tell that my emotions were in severe need of moderation. I sucked in a breath, shaky with frustration, my hands balled at my sides. No, that definitely didn't fit the exercise. I had to give this a real try. Maybe there wasn't some artificial block inside me that was keeping me from my dragon. Maybe I was the one holding it and holding myself too tight and tense around it. I inhaled more slowly, letting the air flow into my lungs. My ribs expanded, the breath shuddered on the way out, and I gritted my teeth. Why couldn't I even get this right? "Hey," Aaron said gently, "come here." He beckoned me over. I swiveled and scooted backward so I could lean against his folded legs. He set his hands on my upper arms, his thumbs tracing light arcs over my biceps. The warmth of his presence soaked into my back, even though there was at least a foot between our bodies. That bond, that tug, the tie that marked us as mates. I wet my lips, trying to push aside the swell of desire. "This isn't something anyone masters on their first try," Aaron said, relaxing. "Is one of the hardest things someone like us has to do. Try again, in and out, slow and easy. Focus on the feeling of my hands and try to let any other thoughts wisp right by you." His thumbs continued their careful arc back and forth over my skin. The thoughts they were provoking were a truly different kind of frustration from before. But I followed his instructions, closing my eyes in and out, like the to and fro of his caress, slow, and even nothing else needed to matter except for that, and the heat of his touch. Another breath slipped from my lungs, and I realized I was doing it. The tension had seeped out of me. Disappointment no longer ached behind my sternum. I didn't know if any of this was going to help me bring forth my dragon, but it definitely hadn't hurt anything. "Thanks," I said. "I guess I needed that." I heard Aaron smile in the shape of his voice. "Sometimes we shifters can get too caught up in the animal side of our natures. I think it's important to remember we're so much more than that. Our minds matter too." As enjoyable as certain animalistic impulses might be, a little mischief crept into his tone. With that last sentence, I shot him a glance over my shoulder, and the slightly wicked smile he gave me then sent a wash of heat over me. So my Disney prince had a bit of an edge to him, did he? The attraction burning between us loosened a memory, one from not that long ago. Marco said something. He said in time we'd become full mates. I thought we were already mates. Is there something else we need to do? Aaron's smile turned right. "There's no hurry," he said. "You shouldn't take that step unless you're fully comfortable with the idea. With each of us, the mate bond isn't confirmed until it's consummated. That is, until the mates have sex." I filled in for him. My cheeks flared. "Yeah, I'm not sure how long it's going to take before I'm ready for that. I never have before. because that wrenching, clawing feeling had always gotten in the way before. But I didn't feel that with any of the alphas. I wanted to open myself up to them, at least I thought I did. There'd been so many upheavals and revelations in the last couple days. How could I really be sure what I wanted, what was best for me? What was best for them? You knew you were bonded without even understanding it. Aaron said, his hands smoothed over my shirt to lightly massage my back. It's possible to be intimate with someone you're not bonded to, but part of you is always going to bark. I won't pretend I haven't had desires and pursued them to some extent, but the same feeling always held me back. Being that close with anyone else just didn't feel right. So it wasn't just me, the guys felt it too. I glanced back at him. Again, with a fluttering in my chest, I'd waited for them without knowing what I was doing, and he'd waited for me too. There really isn't any rush to make that commitment, he said, gazing back at me with those clear blue eyes. We've only just found you. We can give you whatever time you need. Not everyone felt that way. My thoughts started to West's words earlier this morning. It must be the same for all of the kin groups, including Aaron's. The longer I held out, leaving him without a mate, the longer the rest of his kin had to go. Baron, are you sure? I asked before I knew I was going to. I mean that waiting for me is the right decision. What if? My voice faltered, my doubts jumbled awkwardly inside me. Aaron leaned forward and wrapped his arms around me, tipping his face next to mine. I've never been more sure of anything. Serenity, you're everything I could have wanted in a mate. My back tensed against his chest. He drew back a few inches. You don't like people using your full name, do you? I grimaced. It's not so much that as I just got so used to pretending it wasn't my name, to feeling like saying it would be a dangerous thing. Just one more thing you need to reclaim, B murmured. You are Serenity. Drake, you are the last in the dragon shifter line. That heritage belongs to you, and no one else. No one can take it from you. He pressed a kiss to the sensitive spot just behind my ear. A bolt of desire shot through me, right to my sex. I pushed myself toward him, and he eased me onto his lap. When I raised my head, his lips were right there to meet mine. We kissed until I started to lose my breath. Aaron edged his thumb under the hem of my tee. I mumbled encouragingly, and he slid his hand right up under over my bare skin. He teased his knuckles over my breast, making my nipple pebble. I moaned, kissing him harder. A tight ball of need formed between my legs. Carefully, he eased the strap of my bra over my shoulder to loosen it. Then he dipped his fingers inside the cup to fondle me skin to skin. I gasped as he rolled my nipple under his thumb, drawing it to an even sharper peak. He bent his head and nibbled his way down my neck. Every nerve in my body hummed at his touch. I was getting carried away again, but it didn't feel quite so scary. I could do this. I could take this pleasure, and if I wanted to stop, I knew all I had to do was say so. I shoved my hands up under Aaron's shirt, needing to feel the hot, firm planes of his chest, all that coiled strength. I traced the lines of those muscles all the way down to the waist of his pants. Aaron groaned, squeezing my breast, his erection pressed against my thigh, so big and so hard, all for me. The thought sent a flare of hunger through me, and it came with an icy splinter of panic. I could have him, tie him to me so he was mine for the rest of my life. If I said I was ready now, that I wanted all of him, he wouldn't hesitate. He'd give himself over just like that for all time to a shifter who couldn't even shift a dragon, who couldn't sprout her own wings. I pulled back my head, dropping Aaron's hands, stilled far enough. I dragged in a breath to steady myself, the hunger still not at me. My lips ached to feel his against them. Far enough, I agreed, but we can stay here for a while. He grinned and brought his mouth back to mine. 16 Ren, wow, Kylie said, hugging my arm. Shifters know how to eat, don't they? We were standing at one end of the huge table that had been set up in the village common. It stretched across the entire space, and even then it wasn't enough for all the villagers to sit down. Many were filling their plates from the bowls and platters set all down the middle and ambling off to find a spot on the ground or the extra chairs scattered around the common. Delicious smells assaulted my nose, roasted meat and stewed veggies and fresh bread. I wasn't drooling, but it was a near thing. Between working out and making out, I developed a healthy appetite for dinner. I grabbed one of the plates. I don't think they do this all the time, I said. Obviously, Kylie rolled her eyes. It's all for you. You're a celebrity, she said it teasingly, But the fact was it was kind of true. Every shifter we passed gave me a longer look than they aimed at anyone else. Several of the cooks dashed over to encourage me to try this casserole or those ribs when we made for a couple of chairs. Off to the side, a middle-aged man stopped us and motioned us back to the table. No, you have a spot here, of course, he said, dipping his head. There's always room for you at our table. I looked for my alphas, hoping one of them might step in and tell everyone to stop fussing. I wasn't that big a deal. But then they kind of thought I was a big deal too, didn't they? Wes was busy stalking through the crowd, offering a greeting here and a friendly slap to the shoulder there. Marco was chatting with a few rather roguish-looking guys. Nate and Aaron had paused to talk down by the other end of the table. No help from any of them. More of the villagers came around as I ate. As soon as I tried one thing off my plate, someone had brought me to more tidbits. They watched me eagerly, so I did my best to try everything. But before too long, my stomach was protesting from being stuffed and from the pressure. What do you say we take a little stroll and walk off some of this feast? I said to Kylie. She nodded. Yeah, I can see a breather might be a good idea. Being famous is hard. She elbowed me playfully as we stood up, but she cleared the way through the crowd, giving our excuses. Just taking a little walk, we'll be back soon. We ducked between a couple of shops that had closed for the evening, hurried past a short line of houses, and rambled out along the edge of the tree-spotted hills that surrounded most of the town. As soon as the sounds of the feast had faded behind me, I exhaled in relief. Kylie linked her arm around mine. It's weird, yeah, she said. So weird, I laughed, glad there was one person here who understood that I might be a shifter by birth, but after all those years in the city, living like and believing I was only human, I didn't belong here. Not really. But hey, at least that weirdness comes with for super devoted and extra super hot guys. I gave her a little shove. 3 devoted guys and one who's not sure I deserve the time of day. She snickered. Oh no, I've seen the way the big bad Volf looks at you. We're still bonded, I muttered. He can't help feeling something. That doesn't mean he wants it to stay that way. Oh, so you might only have 3 super hot mates. I guess you'll survive somehow when you're queen of all the shifters. Maybe you can find some extras to send my way. You'd really want that. Kylie hooked up with guys now and then when she was in the mood, but she'd never seemed all that boy crazy. She shrugged. Why not if they look like that and worship the ground I walk on? I don't see how it could go wrong. I don't know. You could find out that the entire future of the shifters depends on you. I was only just getting used to the responsibility of having to pay rent. I glanced back toward the common hidden behind the houses. All those people think I'm going to save them somehow. Okay, I can see how that would be a bit much. Kylie dropped her hand to squeeze mine. You don't have to do it, right? I mean, your Volf man is always going on about having a choice and making his own decisions. You get to do that too. If you really don't think you're up for the whole shift, a queen gig couldn't you just tell them you're out, that they should go find some other mate? I paused. I hadn't really considered that possibility before. I guess so, but then the kin groups will be on their own, nothing uniting them from what they've said. It's always been the dragon shifter doing that, and I'm the only one around, maybe the only one at all. What would have happened if my older sisters had survived? Would I have taken on this role at all, or just watched from the sidelines? I hadn't thought to ask that before, but now the question itched at me. I'd have to ask the guys the next time I had the chance. Kylie waved her free hand in the air. I'm just saying, you didn't sign up for this. It's your life. To maybe when you find your mom, she'd be able to help you figure things out. If I find my mom, I still have no idea why she sent me down into that subway tunnel. I dipped my hand into my purse and tugged out the crystal slab. It was the closest thing I had to a connection to mom, though I've been keeping it with me. But looking at its glossy surface only made me more annoyed. Why couldn't she at least have left me a note or something telling me what the hell I'm supposed to do with this? Had she meant to tell me more? Thinking back to the voice I'd heard in my head, she'd stopped so abruptly because that had been all she had to say, or because she'd been interrupted. Maybe she'd had to tangle with the vampires down there, to maybe she hadn't made it past them. without a squad of alphas to fight beside her. No, I couldn't think like that. I turned to the circle, watching the light play off its faintly etched surface. "Let me see," Kylie said. I handed it to her, and she held it up over her head. As if examining the sky through it, she wrinkled her nose and passed it back to me. "Nope, still not getting it. It's a really nice piece of abstract art, though." She wiggled her fingers over it. "Maybe you need a little voodoo to activate." I registered the moving shadow from the corner of my eye. Only an instant before a black-furred Volf leapt out of it. That instant saved my life. The Volf lunged straight for my throat, and my reflexes kicked in just soon enough to spin sideways. The beast hit my shoulder instead, teeth raking my flesh through my shirt sleeve, paws pummeling me to the ground. Pain splintered through my arm. With a gasp, I lashed out with the only thing close to a weapon I had on me, the crystal slab in my hand. I smacked it into the Volf's skull. The creature jerked back a few inches, blood dripping from its mouth. With a snarl, it smashed its paw against the slab. The thick crystal didn't break, but it jolted from my clutching fingers and tumbled across the grass. A blur of motion whipped past me. Kylie shrieked. I caught a glimpse of flailing arms and a gray-furred bodice looming over her. When the Volf snapped at me again, I kicked at its heavy body, slamming my elbow into its jaw, and screamed with all the panic and pain rushing through me. "Help, somebody help us." The Volf cuffed me across the temple, growling. My head spun. I jabbed out with all my limbs. As long as I kept moving, as long as I kept fighting back, I had a chance. It sank its teeth into my blocking forearm, and a sharper pain radiated through my flesh. A whimper broke from my throat. I kneed at the creature's belly, but I couldn't budge it. It scraped its claws across my abdomen with another sear of agony. Where were those goddamn talons I'd managed to sprout this morning? If I could just shift into the scaled, fire-breathing animal I knew I had in me, I'd show this beast what real hurting was. But the scrabbling inside me felt more desperate than determined. Every time I tried to reach for the power inside me, the Volf wrenched at my arm or gouged its claws into me again. I couldn't focus on anything. Through the haze of pain, shouts rang out. The Volf flinched. It took one last bite at my throat, but I managed to knock its muzzle to the side with my throbbing arm. The stink of its rasping breath flooded my nose as its fangs nicked my chin. Then it was springing away. A thunder of rushing paws echoed around me. A whole pack of wolves shot past me, snarling and snapping at the fleeing animals. My whole body was on fire, and not the enjoyable kind. I rolled onto my side toward Kylie. My shredded shirt tugged at my wounds, tacky with blood. More streaked down. The hand I reached toward my best friend Kylie was sprawled in the grass, her face turned away from me, her arm twisted at an unnatural angle behind her. Her pink pixie cut was streaked with red. My fault. I hadn't protected her. I hadn't even been able to protect myself. A few of the running bodies shifted back into human form around us. Nate's warm hand pressed against my side. "Ren, quick, we've got to stop the bleeding." Aaron pressed a folded shirt to my side. The sting expanded, and I shuddered. "You'll be okay," he said. "You're already healing. Dragons heal fast." But even his mild voice came out ragged. "Kylie," I said. Marco dropped onto his knees beside me and clasped my hand to stop me from moving my arm any more than I already had. For women had clustered around my friend. One scratched her own wrist with her teeth and dribbled blood over Kylie's wounds. The others pressed bandages over them. "She's alive," one of them said, catching my gaze. "We'll make sure she stays that way. No rogue will take a life on our watch. I'll empty my own body of blood before I let that happen." Alive. Kylie was alive. A small shiver of relief passed through me, not enough to dislodge the knot of guilt in my stomach. But I finally let myself sag into the grass. Aaron was right. A splintering heat was crawling up to my skin from inside me, now knitting my flesh back together. At least that part of my shifter powers didn't need me to coax it into working. The sensation hurt almost as bad as getting the wounds in the first place. My eyelids drooped as exhaustion rolled through me with it. "What did they do to her?" a voice said from over me. Was that West? I never heard him sound so pain-bid and scratch her up, but nothing did deep for her to heal on her own. Aaron said. "They were clearly trying to do a lot worse. Did you catch any of them?" "Not exactly." West spat out the words. A few of the others pounced on one of the coyotes, but they didn't stop to ask questions, and he's never going to be answering any now. The others took off to fast rogues. They all looked like canine kin, Nate remarked. They aren't my kin, West snapped, no matter what they look like, of course. The rogue group would send canines for an attack here. Aaron said they'd have been hoping you wouldn't smell them approaching. Since they blended in with the locals, he smoothed his hand over my hair. I opened my eyes, and he gave me a tight smile. Good thing we started on the self-defense lessons. I couldn't get it off me. I murmured, my throat hoarse. I tried. I couldn't stop them. Hey, Nate said you stopped them from killing you. That's all that matters. Marco straightened up. So they already know we're here. That's a pity. We'll have to assume they're following our movements from now on. Were we going to move? I didn't want to go anywhere. I didn't want the guys to go. If they left, my thoughts jumbled in my head. I ached too much to set them straight. I tipped my head, and my gaze caught on the crystal slab. It was sitting in the grass, leaning against a rock where it had fallen. A splash of blood had splattered across its clear face, splattered and seeped darker into the lines and dots of the etching. I stared at it, my vision doubling and studying again. As my body throbbed, a memory rippled past my eyes. Mom perched at our dining room table, poring over a map on her tablet. I'd glanced over her shoulder as I walked by, and she'd tapped the app close. What are you looking at? I asked her, and she'd said nothing for you to worry about. And 2 days later, she'd vanished. The lines and speckles, I hadn't seen their exact pattern before, but I'd seen patterns like them. They were laid out like a map's roads, rivers, and towns. They looked so random before, but now at that angle, with them drawn so starkly in my blood, the full picture swam into focus. Follow the crystal. The damn thing was literally a map. 17 Ren. Are you sure that's the right place? West said, frowning at my phone. I set it in the middle of the table, between the 5 of us, with the map app open. Look at it, I said, motioning between it and the crystal slab. They're practically identical. I pored over the entire country, and that's the only place that's even close. Aaron eased the phone a little closer to him. To study at Sunridge, Wyoming. Do you have any idea why your mother would have wanted you to go there? Oh, why? There to be a lovely picture of it imprinted on a crystal in the first place, Marco remarked. I shook my head. The muscles in my shoulders stung at the movement I'd kept healing as I slept last night, but ready marks still streaked my arm, chest, and abdomen. Where the Wolf had sliced me up, the pain hadn't completely eased either. I've never heard of it, I said. Mom never mentioned it. But why would she send me to find the crystal if she didn't want me to go to the place? It shows we can make the drive, Nate said. Even stopping for the night. We'll get there tomorrow. We can figure out the rest once we see what's there. As much as I enjoy a good adventure, Marco said, I'm feeling wary of surprises. At this moment, I say we don't leave until Wolf Boy's people are finished their patrol. He glanced at West, who gave him a short nod. They're still surveying the area around the village for any further signs of rogue activity. I expect them to report back within the next couple hours, so we're sticking around here until then, I said. In that case, I want to get in some more defense training. Aaron's eyebrows rose slightly. You're still recovering. You shouldn't strain your body too much. I pushed back my chair. I'm not saying we go all out, but I need to be able to handle myself better in a fight. These guys are obviously still after me. That attack won't be the last one. I want to know I can get through the next time on more than just luck. Nate started, but West glowered at him. She wants to train. She says she can handle it. Is she a dragon or not? Good question. My gaze darted to the ceiling. Kylie was lying in one of the bedrooms upstairs, resting from injuries. She didn't have the supernatural ability to quickly heal. It wasn't just my own life at stake. I guess I'll just fight West if none of the rest of you wants to come, I said. West narrowed his eyes at me when I shot him a challenging smile. In the end, all 5 of us tramped back into the clearing where we practiced yesterday morning. A few of the villagers trailed after us, but to my relief, West spoke to them, and they drifted away. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, jitters running through my muscles. I was way too wound up. That hadn't helped me any yesterday. Thinking back to my little interlude with Aaron, the part before I'd gotten distracted by his hands and his lips, I inhaled slowly and felt my lungs expand in and out steady. And even I spent too much time hiding myself away, not even knowing why. But now it was safe for me to let my dragon out. Now I needed to. Those rogue shifters who attacked me last night, they hadn't cared that I couldn't fully access my powers, yet they'd seen me as a threat anyway. Anger stirred in my chest at the thought, along with a shudder of energy. Like the flap of powerful wings, I could be that threat. I had it in me. I knew I did. When you're attacked by someone stronger than you, there's no shame in taking every advantage you can get, Aaron said. He pointed to his own body. We all have weak spots where one quick hit can do a lot of damage. Eyes, throat, groin. If you can get a strike in any of those places, go for it. Maybe not while you're sparring with us, Marco piped up. I'd personally like to keep my family jewels unsmashed. Nate rolled his eyes at the Jaguar shifter. Not helpful, Marco. He glanced at Aaron. Maybe we could find her a weapon she can get comfortable with for the time being and break shifter law. West shook his head. Are you out of your mind? I thought the whole point of bringing her back into the fold was to settle everyone down, not rile them up even more. There's a law against us using weapons, I said. Aaron nodded. The kin groups decided together that no shifter should attack another with anything but their own strength. Our strength we inherit and earn. Winning that kind of fight is a fair measure of victory. It also means most of the time no one has to die over a scuffle, but she can't use all of her strength yet, Nate said. If there's ever been a time to make an exception. No, I said quickly. I didn't want any more exceptions made for me. I've got to learn to do this the shifter way. Come on, who's going to try me? Marco stepped forward with his crooked grin. I waved a finger at him. No funny business this time. I don't know if I'd have called what we were getting up to yesterday funny. He drawled. Amusement and heat mixed in his gaze. The memory of our kiss stirred the embers of desire inside me. I swallowed and raised my hands defensively. That desire had worked in my favor yesterday. If there was some way I could combine that with Aaron's clear-headedness and my anger at last night's attackers. Marco came at me with quick feint and a swing of his fist. I dodged to the side and managed to land a kick to his knee. Oh, you're not getting away with that, he said, his indigo eyes gleaming, and he caught me around the waist. I managed to yank out of his arms, spinning around, my heart beating faster as he circled me. I reached back to last night's assault, the searing of the rogue wolf's teeth and claws slashing into my flesh. They couldn't have sliced into scales. I could have towered over him, set him aflame. Next time I would. Next time I held on to that thought, whipping a fist toward Marco and darting out of his reach. Tension started to tighten my chest, but I breathed into it, willing it to release. I wasn't going to force my dragon. I was going to let it come over me naturally, because it was who I was, because those beasts had threatened me and the people I cared about, and I was not going to let that stand. From the corner of my eye, I saw Aaron motion to Nate. Let's mix things up a bit. Nate shocked off his clothes and a couple of smooth movements before I'd quite process what was happening. He was loping toward me in bare form. Marco veered to the side, chuckling under his breath. Nate bared his teeth at me, but his grisly face managed to look apologetic at the same time. It's fine, I said to him. Come and get me. He bounded closer and loomed over me on his rear legs. When enormous paw swung at my head, I ducked under it, my pulse racing through my veins. The gleam of his claws and the massive animalistic presence brought back more flashes of last night, and more of last night's terror. The sealed cuts on my arms and torso prickled. I was stronger than that. I threw myself at Nate's forelegs, trying to tip him off balance. He swayed and dropped down over me, but I rolled to the side just in time. My feet seemed to bite into the ground as I shoved myself upright. Power coiled through my thighs and ash and taste crept up my throat. Yes, he lunged at me, and I left to the side faster than before. My haunches were bunching and expanding, unused muscles unfurling their strength. The armor of scales tingled over my skin from knees to waist, and it formed in the middle of my back where my wings should form. Let it come, let it come. But as the sensation swept higher, my lungs expanding, a jolt of panic shot through me. What was I doing? I couldn't control. It couldn't feel where it would stop. I lost so goddamn much I couldn't lose myself to the thoughts. Didn't make much sense, but they jarred against my shift. I stumbled and fell to my knees that were pale and human, peeking through the tears in my sweatpants. Had started to shift. My pants were hanging right off me where my legs had swelled to closer to dragon size. I grasped the tatters, peering at the skin beneath, as if I could will the scales to return. I'd gotten closer, so close I could still taste the fire in the back of my mouth. You know, sparks I'm starting to think you want this to work less than anyone," West said from the edge of the clearing. My head jerked up, my cheeks flaming. Nate growled, shifting back into human form as he strode toward West. "Could you shut up for once?" he snapped. "I'd like to see how well you handled the shift if you'd gone 16 years. Without the chance to try, Nate, Aaron said, and the bigger guy halted. The Eagle shifter turned toward West. "I agree with him, though. If you're going to just stand there griping, we don't need you here." West scowled, the tension in the air wrenched at me. This was my fault to the clashing between the alphas, because I couldn't do the thing I'd been born to do. "Damn it." Marco cocked his head. "Company arriving," he said. "Come here, princess." He offered his hand to help me up. I clutched at my ruined pants, holding the larger scraps of fabric over my crotch. Marco smirked, leaning in for a second as I stood. "Nothing I won't see soon enough." His sly voice and a shiver of anticipation through me. Despite my churning emotions, a squad of shifters appeared at the edge of the clearing. West's people. I was learning to read the signs. Canine shifters tended toward the lean and lanky, cool and wary. The red-headed one, who looked like she was barely 21 herself, I bet was a fox. West stalked over to meet them. "Report," he said. "No sign of the rogues in a 20-mile radius." The man at the fore of the group said, "We didn't even send them. However they got here, they're gone now." "Not too far gone, I'm sure," West muttered. He turned back toward the rest of us. "If we're going, we should get out of here while we know the immediate area is clear. Less chance that they'll be watching closely enough to see where we're headed. I want to hear the details, and then I'll be ready to go." Sparks gets a new pants. In the meantime, my bag packed and my legs recovered by pants hadn't mangled, I went to see Kylie alone. She was sitting up on the bed, her back propped against a pillow, skimming her thumb over her phone screen. Thick bandages lay across her neck and her right arm, and those were only the ones I could see. A purple bruise marked her forehead. Our shifter hosts had washed the blood from her hair, but the pink tufts still lay more limply than usual. But she smiled when she saw me and set down the phone. "Time to go," she said. "Yeah." I hesitated. "I don't want to just leave you here with a bunch of strangers, but we don't know if the rogues will attack again when we're Ren." She held out her arms, beckoning me over. I walked into her embrace. I hugged her carefully, worried about her injuries, but she squeezed me with all her strength. "Don't worry about me. These people are looking after me just fine. You've got your stuff to do. I'll hang out a little while longer." And Aaron said it should be okay for me to go back to the city by the time I'm all fixed up. "You just have to promise you'll come visit me, even if you get all busy with shift a queen business." You hear a pained smile tugged at my lips. "Of course, you're still my best friend." "That's right, besties for life." She let go of me to raise her hand, and we tapped knuckles. "Don't get too distracted by all those yummy men either, okay? But you better indulge at least a little." A blush tickled up the back of my neck. "I think I've already got that covered." Something else I'm going to need to hear all about." She gave my arm one last pat and waved me off. "Focus on finding your mom. I want to hear all about the end of that mystery too." "I hope it's a good one," I said with total honesty. What was waiting for us in Sunridge, Wyoming, another clue to another branch of this weird scavenger hunt Mom had sent us on, or some actual answers this time, was Mom waiting there. I didn't know what I'd say if I finally saw her again, but God, I wanted to so badly go. Kylie said outright, shooing me. "Now don't let me hold you back." The guys were standing around the 8-seater SUV West had commandeered, as I guessed you could do when you were an alpha. The idea was that we could sleep in it overnight rather than going through the hassle of finding a hotel, and I suspected the guys liked having the extra space rather than being squashed into a regular car. I tossed my bag in the trunk, and Nate yanked the hatch shut without any debate. Or maybe I'd missed one. West climbed into the driver's seat. Aaron got in beside him. He'd been studying the maps as Marco nabbed his spot in the middle row. Nate closed his solid, warm hand around mine. It was funny, even though I'd seen him in his animal form more often than any of the other guys, and even though that form was the most menacing of the four, his presence wasn't anything but comforting. Well, and maybe a little exciting. My gaze lingered on the muscles that filled out his thin tee, and a heavier warmth pulled low in my belly. He tugged me with him toward the back seat. I came without argument when we sat down on the soft leather. He wrapped his arm around me and tipped me against his brawny torso. I breathed in the musky, peppery smell of him, so fucking delicious. There were a lot of things screwed up about the situation I found myself in, but having these four guys by my side, at least the three of them who definitely wanted to be there, might make up for the rest. The car's engine rumbled, its vibration hummed faintly through the seats. As Wes turned us toward the road out of town, I let my head lean against Nate's broad shoulder. I didn't want to think right now, not about Kylie's injuries or having to leave her behind, and not about the rogues who tracked me down to kill me just 2 days after I found out who I really was. Not about the quest my mother had sent me on, drowning in Nate's scent, and the feel of his body sounded like heaven. If I lifted my face just a couple inches, I could have pressed my lips to the base of his collarbone, just above the neck of his shirt, and tasted him too. But I held myself back. The other guys were right there, obviously. They had to know I felt this connection to all of them, but I wasn't the biggest fan of PDAs, and anyway, I wasn't sure I deserved to indulge after yet another failure this morning. Nate's hand rubbed up and down my arm. "You're tense," he murmured. "Is there anything you want to talk about?" "No," I said automatically. But maybe there was. I hate that I seem to have that block when it comes to shifting. If I could have shifted last night, I'd have destroyed those rogue shifters. He smiled. "You absolutely would have, friend. But you don't have to worry about that. You've got all of us. We're not going to let anyone get that close to you again. We should have been more careful to begin with. I didn't realize they'd be brazen enough to attack you that close to a kin settlement." "Shit, he better not be feeling guilty. It's not your fault," I said, "and I know you all want to protect me, but I want to be able to defend myself like I should be able to, and you will." He brushed his lips against the top of my head. The contact sent a tingle over my scalp. "You're comparing yourself to the four of us, and we've had decades to grow into our powers. I'm impressed by how quickly you're discovering yourself." Oh, he sounded like he meant it. Was I being too hard on myself? I found it difficult to believe, but the knot of guilt inside me loosened just a little. I nestled closer to him. He lifted my legs onto his lap, so I was completely cuddled against him, my great teddy bear of a man. His other hand kept up its caresses up and down my arm and reached a little farther to graze the side of my breast. I swallowed a gasp, arching into the contact instinctively. "Correction, my great hot bear of a man." Nate ducked his head to nip my earlobe. My heart skipped giddily. "I think you deserve a little reward for your hard work," he said under his breath, a playful tone slipping into his voice. "What do you have in mind?" I whispered back. "You seem to be enjoying this." He traced his fingertips over the curve of my breast, again catching the peak. This time I clamped my mouth shut against a whimper. "The other guys won't mind at all. We belong to you. Ren, whatever you need, whatever you want." His answer brought back Kylie's comment in the subway tunnel about being with the guys at the same time. Nate kissed the side of my neck with a teasing swipe of tongue, and suddenly I was wondering what it would be like to have one of my other alphas' hands on me at the same time, stirring up even more of these heady sensations, driving me wild. The thought dampened my panties. Nate cupped my breast, his thumb easing back and forth over my hardened nipples. Shivers of pleasure raced through me. There wasn't anything in the world I wanted more in that moment than to keep feeling what I was feeling right now. One last hesitation held me from completely giving in. "I don't think I'm ready yet. I mean to Ren." Nate murmured my name in his low, longing baritone, sent a flash over my skin. "You don't need to do anything. Just let me do this for you." His free hand traveled up my thigh. He eased it up and down, still caressing my breast, while he did, until the heat building inside me had me ready to melt. I flexed my hips, and he dipped his fingers between my legs to meet the spot so desperate for contact. My whole body caught fire as he stroked my core. He teased his fingers over every sensitive part of me, as if he knew exactly what I was hungry to feel. Pleasure sparked through my veins. I gripped his shirt, my breath growing shaky. I was melting together and coming apart all at once. Nate flicked his thumb over my clit. I barely managed to bite back a moan. My hips moved to match his rhythm. "That's right," he said softly. "I've got you." Oh, he did. He angled his mouth to capture mine, drinking in my whimper as his hands slid up to delve right under my clothes, he slicked a finger over my opening. The heel of his hand swiveled against my clit. A wave of bliss swelled inside me, tingling through my body from head to toe. I kissed him back as if I were starving for it, my fingers curling tighter into his shirt. He pumped his hand gently. Then his rhythm started to speed up. I shattered against him, so close to the edge, and he hooked his finger right up inside me. The damn broke pleasure rushed through me like a flash fire, consuming my bones and leaving my muscles quivering. Nate kept stroking me until the last waves of my orgasm had faded. He kissed me again, sweet but demanding, and tucked me against him as if I was meant to fit right there in his arms. I held on to him momentarily, sat it wondering how on earth I could possibly deserve this much devotion. 18 West. One deer's trail smelled a little fresher than the others. That one had fallen behind the herd from its scent. It was full grown, but young, probably injured. Then some stumble that had lamented it and made it easier prey. I stalked after it, the leaves of the forest underbrush rippling over my fur, everything I needed for hunting was sharper in my wolf form. My nose, my claws, my teeth. It felt good to flex those muscles. After all that time cooped up in the car, no living thing should spend an entire day on the road in one of those metal boxes. As I wove through the forest, I tasted the air for other scents. The world was full of punch and sap and loamy moss, but what I was really watching for was the cloying, sugary sweetness of the Fae. I hadn't got a trace of it so far, but you couldn't be too careful when you ventured into the wilderness, the untamed stretches of countryside were as much fate territory as the human cities belonged to the bloodsuckers. The magic burn scar on my upper chest prickled at the thought. The only sweetness in the air now was a faint wisp from back at our camp, the tart honeyed scent that belonged to Wren. It tugged at me even from that distance, reminding me that I was meant to be there with her, as if hunting for dinner wasn't as suitably mately duty. But that tug wouldn't ease off until I claimed her or disowned her. That thought brought back the expression on her face yesterday morning when I told her how easily I could cast aside our bond if I decided to. It did hurt her, hearing that, if just for a moment, but she'd still been able to tell me she respected my position. She hadn't pleaded or argued. She believed that I would do what I felt to be right, and that it was my right to do so. Maybe I've been too harsh with her the last few days. She hadn't really run, and it definitely hadn't been her choice to hide. If I was going to be angry with anyone for the situation we found ourselves in, it should be her mother. I didn't enjoy causing Wren pain, and when I remembered her agonized breath as she'd laying bloody in the grass last night, my chest tightened. That was exactly why she needed someone to be harsh. She had to learn to withstand whatever got thrown at her, because our enemies were going to be so much harsher than I'd ever stoop to. The deer scent grew thicker. I was almost on it. I slowed to a prowl, my ears perked, hooves patterned in the brush unevenly, one leg holding it back with a limp. Just as I guessed, my muscles bunched. I bolted forward and sprang, my jaw as clamped around the deer's sleek neck. With one snap, I severed its throat. A hot gush of fresh blood filled my mouth. The deer squealed, but its body was already sagging by the time its head hit the ground. The poor beast had slumped completely, all the life gone from it. My wolfish heart thumped with glee and the longing to dig in. But I wasn't hunting just for me. It'd be easier to carry the kill back to camp in human form. I shifted, reveling in the smooth transition of muscle and bone from one form to the other. I was never more sure of myself and who I was meant to be than in those moments. With the back of my hand, I wiped the lingering blood from my mouth. Not a great looking man form. I lifted the deer, let the worst of the flow drain from its neck, and then hefted the slack body over my shoulder. I'd left my clothes in a heap just beyond the grove, at the side of the road where we'd parked the van. I sat down the deer and pulled them on before moving to join the others. I had nothing to hide, but I didn't want to have to explain the strange scar to Wren, and she wasn't exactly used to having people stroll around naked in front of her yet. The heat in her eyes whenever one of us did made that perfectly clear. I didn't want that heat directed at me. It stirred up too much desire of my own. One deer ready for dinner, I announced, stepping out into the grove. The other guys had already gotten A large fire crackling. Aaron was just finishing setting up a makeshift spit. Nate grinned and moved to take the deer from me. Ren, sitting on a stone a few feet from the fire pit, wrinkled her nose. I didn't like the discomfort I saw in her eyes now either. Maybe I should have come out naked, so you just went out there and hunted it down. She said I wasn't going to let myself feel ashamed about something this basic. What, like an animal? In case you've forgotten, I am one. I did a lot worse to those vampires a couple days ago, yeah, but they attacked us first. Her gaze followed the deer as Nate set it on a log to skin it. As the knife cut into the hide, she winced and looked away. We need to eat. We're all predators here. Sparks, this is the way of the wild. I motioned toward the deer. I picked off one that was already lame. It wasn't fit to survive anyway. So just enjoy your meal. You can thank me after. Ren, I drew my legs closer to my stone perch and balanced my phone on my knees. It's like he constantly has to be taking me down a peg. I texted to Kylie. He treats me like I'm an idiot. Boys pulling pigtails. She wrote back with a winking emoji. He's got it bad for you. I glanced across the grove to where Wes was helping Nate arrange the deer carcass on the spit. Aaron had fashioned the firelight caught on the red and silver in his hair and the angular planes of his handsome face. Way too handsome. Even when I was irritated with him, I couldn't squash the longing to see a real smile cross that face directed at me. He's 27, I replied. I think he's past the preschool stage of flirting. You'd be surprised, some guys never grow out of it. I say. You march right up to him and plant one on him and then right back to tell me all about the amazing sex you to get up to. I shook my head at the screen. Haha, not likely. Oh hey, Dennis here, catch you again soon. I text the phone into my pocket and watched the guy set the roasting stick holding our dinner over the fire. The flames sizzled as a few drops of blood dripped off the skin flesh. The mass of pink and red muscle made me think of the claw marks that still hadn't quite faded from my skin. The blood in Kylie's hair last night. I rubbed my arms. What had West said about that deer? That it had been weak, not fit to survive. Did he think the same? When he looked at me, I wasn't even coming close to keeping up with my supposed mates. Marco had said a dragon shifter would put the rest of them to shame. I'd hardly been living up to that expectation. A stick snapped in the forest behind me. I flinched and jerked around, my heart thudding. It was only Marco himself coming back from a patrol of our campsite. He dipped his head to me with his slanted smile. Nothing to worry about, princess. All clear. The thickening darkness behind him looked anything but clear. The rogue shifters might not be close enough for him to sense, but they could be tracking us. Who knew how quickly they could move? Most of the ones that had attacked me and Kylie had outrun West's skin. Apprehension prickled over me. I hugged myself and turned back to the fire. Marcos hunted past me and cocked his head, eyeing the spit. Now that's a fine sight. I'm glad the rest of you are so domestic. West snorted. Nate let out a disgruntled half of breath. I'd hate to see what your kills look like when you're done playing with them, he said. Marco chuckled. I'm a jaguar, not a house cat, and I'd bet I could have taken down a deer twice that size. Choice is long to cook and more meat than we'd have time to eat. Sounds like a brilliant plan. West motioned toward the trees. Go ahead and take a stab at it if you've got that much to prove. Oh, why bother when you've already done the work for me? The jaguar shifter lowered himself onto a log and stretched his legs out as if perfectly relaxed. A thump from the other side of the van made me startle again. That's Aaron coming back, Nate said, noticing right the eagle shifter had been taking a turn over the landscape from above before it got too dark to spot our enemies. He emerged from behind the van a moment later, buttoning up his shirt as he came. I couldn't help feeling a little sorry to see those sculpted muscles disappearing behind the fabric. See anything interesting, bird boy? Marco asked him. He poked at the fire idly with a stick. Nothing worthy of immediate concern, Aaron said, but we shouldn't lower our guards. No chance of that with the bunch of you. Nate grimaced at him. Why don't you make yourself useful and turn the damn spit Marco home? I think this side needs a little longer. Give me that. West grabbed the stick from him. You're going to put out the fire at that rate? He prodded. Two of the logs Marco had jostled closer together. A flicker of a memory passed through my head. A brief squabble with my sister's tug of war over A toil lump rose in my throat. The question that had occurred to me earlier prodded me again. This seemed as good a time to ask as any. There are only 4 alphas at any time, right? I said. Marco gave me an amused look. Aren't we enough for you? Princess, I rolled my eyes at him. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant a dragon shifter is supposed to take the alphas as mates. So what if there's more than one dragon shifter? My sisters weren't supposed to die. Aaron dipped his head. No, he said, and it's common for each dragon shifter to give birth to more than one daughter. In case of a tragedy, generally speaking, your parents would have chosen which of you seemed best suited for the responsibility, and the others would have supported her. They could take mates as well, but their line wouldn't pass on. Oh, I guess that makes sense. So if the rogues hadn't carried out their bloody assault, it might have been one of my sisters bonded to these. For now, the thought sent an uncomfortable prickling over my skin. I turned my gaze back to the fire. The flames danced higher, nearly grazing the deer's flesh. It was starting to brown. The sizzles that reached my ear now were drips of fat, not blood. The smell of roasted venison was trickling through the air. My mouth started to water. Maybe I didn't like the idea of killing a deer, but I wasn't too squeamish to eat it now that it was already dead. I guess that kind of did make me a hypocrite. The flickering light and the wavering warmth started to lower my nerves. I let my gaze sink into the fire. The flames started up and back down, orange tinged with a darker red around the edges, yellow white at their core. Beautiful the way they flared to life, almost like the fragment of memory rushed up so fast it rocked me on my seat for an instant. I was a little girl again, clutching my mother's scaled leg. As the ground fell away beneath us, the swoop of her wings warbled through the air. Sharp cracks rang out below us. What was that sound? I never heard it before, but it terrified me. Mama opened her dragon mouth and spewed a stream of flame at our attackers. My arm was throbbing. Blood seeped from a gouge just above my elbow. Tears streaked down my cheeks. Another burst of flame filled my vision, and I caught myself before I tipped right over, planting my feet hard on the ground. The heat of the campfire washed over me sharper than before. My hand rose to my arm, to the phantom pain of that long ago wound. I rubbed the skin there. Even though I didn't have a scar to show, it had been real. Ren, Nate said from across the grove. Are you okay? I'm fine. I pushed myself to my feet. I couldn't be that little girl anymore, clinging helplessly while someone else did all the fighting. It didn't matter which of my sister's mom and my dad's would have chosen to lead. I was the only one left, and I had the ferocity in me somewhere. My gaze traveled up one of the tall birch trees near the edge of the grove. Its white bark shone against the darkness. Without letting myself second-guess the impulse, I strode over to it and grasped the lowest branches. "Were you up to?" Princess Marco asked. "Just need to stretch my legs a bit," I said. "Don't mind me." I clambered upward from branch to branch, studying myself when I needed to. Against the trunk, the papery bark rustled under my groping hands. The smells of the roasting meat and the fire fell away, leaving only the tangy scent of sap. I stopped when the trunk had narrowed a little too much for comfort and peered down. West was turning the meat. The other guys were peering up at me, watching my progress. The firelight danced off their faces. I was about as high up as I'd been in the pine a few days ago, a jump I knew I could make, but I didn't want to land. I wanted those wings to unfurl from my back and carry me back toward the sky. The urge to fly had been with me my whole life. Maybe I could draw it all the way out if my body believed shifting was the only way to protect me from the fall. I dragged in a breath, then I launched myself out into the air. Normally I'd have moved right into my landing pose. Feet braced, knees bent, body properly aligned. But I had to believe I'd hurt myself if I hit the ground. I let my limbs scatter. I gasped, slipping from my mouth as my hair whipped up behind me. I could break a leg or worse like this if I didn't shift and glide out of the fall. A fluttering sensation raced through my chest, but my body stayed totally human. My body creamed on down the ground, looking far too close, shit biting back a curse. I yanked my feet under me at the last second. I hit the ground slightly off balance, but managed to roll out of the fall with at least a little bit of grace. My left foot had taken too much of my weight. It throbbed. When I straightened up, I grated my teeth and managed to march back to my stone. Seat without limping if you're looking for thrills. There are plenty of other activities I could suggest, Marco said, arching his eyebrows in what wasn't my greatest show of maturity. I stuck my tongue out at him. He laughed. He didn't seem fazed by my jump, but when my gaze traveled around the fire, I realized Aaron and West were both watching me. Aaron looked thoughtful. West's eyes had narrowed. My skin itched with the suspicion that neither of them totally bought my story about stretching my legs. Thankfully, Nate stepped in then to distract them both and me from my continuing failure to be an actual shifter. He carved a hunk of venison off the roasting deer and offered it to me on a paper plate. "You should eat something," he said. "We're all going to need our strength." Yeah, I dug in, closing my eyes as the smoky juices filled my mouth. Delicious. When had I ever had meat this fresh in my life? But it couldn't quite erase the twisting in my stomach. One more attempt to shift, gone down in flames, or rather gone down without flames. How many more tries? Was I going to get 19 Ren? I slept in a lot worse places than the seat of a fairly luxurious SUV in corners of vacant buildings surrounded by druggies under ratty blankets that smelled like cat piss, tucked away in an alley on the concrete floor of the church basement Fisher operated out of, with a hard lump of guilt filling my stomach over the previous day's thefts and the ones I'd have to commit tomorrow. But tonight I couldn't settle. I pulled the wool blanket West had shoved at me higher over my shoulders and squirmed against the seat back. My body refused to relax into the soft leather in the back seat behind me. The low, steady murmur of Marco's breath told me he'd had no trouble passing out. Nate was sprawled in the driver's seat, which he tipped back to just above my feet, his rugged face soft asleep. West and Aaron were somewhere out in the woods. On first watch, I was surrounded by my alphas, perfectly safe, but maybe the idea of their protection nagged at me more than it comforted me. I closed my eyes and tried to let my mind drift away. Crickets chirped outside the window. A breeze hissed through the tree's branches. The taste of roast venison lingered in my mouth. It was starting to go sour. No toothbrushes out here in the wild. I groped for the bottle of water I'd left on the car floor just after I'd set it back down. A faint humming emanated from Nate's seat. He stirred and reached to his pocket to switch off the alert. He must have said on his phone as he sat up. My restlessness gripped me even harder. I couldn't stand to spend one more second shut away in the SUV. Not right now. He glanced over at me. When I sat up, "I'm just going to switch off with Aaron," he said quietly. "He'll be back here in a few minutes." "I can't sleep," I said. "I think a little walk might burn off some energy." The corners of his eyes crinkled with concern, but he didn't try to stop me. He slipped out the driver's side door, and I eased open the back one. The sky was clear, the stars gleaming bright against the black. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen the constellations that clearly in New York City. The haze of city lights always blotted out all but the most insistent stars. I followed Nate into the woods in silence, wondering whether he and Aaron had arranged a meeting spot or if he was just locating the eagle shifter by scent. The summer night breeze tickled past me, still pleasantly warm. We'd walked for several minutes, weaving between the trees, before a streak of moonlight caught on Aaron's golden blonde hair up ahead. He turned to greet Nate. His gaze halted on me. "No activity so far," he said to Nate, and then to me. "I thought you'd gone to sleep." There was no judgment in his tone or even anything like Nate's almost suffocating concern, just curiosity. My shoulders edged down from the argument. "I've been braced for." I tried, I said with a weak smile. "It didn't stick. I was hoping the walk would help. I can keep you company for that." He nodded to Nate and offered his hand to me. I took it, loving the feel of his strong fingers closing around mine. "So as the walking helped?" he asked as we ambled back toward our campsite. I bit my lip. I felt a little more settled with him there beside me, but that restless twitch was still nibbling at my nerves. "I don't know, not as much as I hoped." He ran his thumb over the back of my hand. "Do you want to talk about what's on your mind?" "How do you know something is on my mind? You can't sleep, and so you're wandering in the woods in the middle of the night." I figured it was a pretty safe guess. I made a face at him, and he gave me an even smile. "Well, it wasn't as if he was wrong. I'm not sure talking will help either. It's worth a try, right?" He paused, turning me toward him. "What's bothering I looked at the ground. You've all been great. Well, West, let's not go there. The rest of you have been, and all the people in that village, everyone is so eager to welcome me as a shifter, as the most important shifter there is, but I still can't even shift. It's only been a few days. Aaron said, you're getting there. Maybe it's not just that I don't know how I can be even half of the things I'm supposed to be. What if I'm ruined because of all those years? When I didn't know who I was, growing up the wrong way, without any idea about any of this. What if I can't ever be a full shifter? Oh, Serenity. He opened his arms, and I stepped closer to him automatically. That pull, that need to be near each of the guys was getting harder to deny. He kept my face, and I tilted my head to meet his kiss. The heat of his lips coursed through me. It didn't take away my doubts, but it was an awfully nice distraction. After the kiss, he eased me back slightly, keeping his hands on either side of my face. His head bowed until the fringe of his hair brushed my forehead. I'll tell you something, he said, something I've never really talked about with anyone. I spent most of my life wondering if I wasn't exactly what a shifter was meant to be. To what I pulled back far enough to stare into his eyes. How could you think that you're not just a shifter? You're the one chosen to be your whole kin group's alpha by a man who might have changed his mind if he'd been alive long enough to see me through to adulthood. For all I knew, Aaron said, there are always cracks where doubt can creep in, no matter how secure your position seems, and mine never felt all that secure. The avian shifters were not always considered equal to the other groups. Most of the canine and feline can see us as something lesser. That's ridiculous, I said. If anything, they should be jealous. You can fly, he chuckled. Of course you'd appreciate that, but it is what it is. And even among my own people, I've told you how important it is to me to lead with my mind more than my animal side. That's not a common attitude among shifters of any kin group. Some of my kin have been wary of my interest in learning and history. There have been more than a few who thought it meant I was making up for a lack of the real strength an alpha needs to lead. I gave him a look up and down, knowing my appreciation of his sculpted body must show in my expression. So these people must have been blind, I'm guessing. Aaron's smile grew into a grin. It's easy for people to distrust what they don't understand, but I've proven myself by now more than once when push came to shove and I had the opportunity to let go, to let the alpha role pass to someone else. I knew I couldn't, that I wanted this, that I was meant for it. And here I still am. I hesitated, remembering what he told me before about how another shifter could become the alpha. You had to fight, people challenged you. Yeah, the good humor in his expression faded for a moment. He glanced away toward the trees, recalling events. I could tell he didn't enjoy thinking about the worst. Was one of my advisors. He got used to having the extra authority when I turned 21 and was meant to take over my full role as alpha. He attacked me. I hated having to fight him. He'd been like an uncle to me, but I was smarter and faster, and that can beat brutality if you know how to use it. And here you still are, I said, repeating his words back to him. Here I am. He drew his gaze back to me. Right then it was so intense, I almost forgot how to breathe. My heart thumped faster. He wasn't just strong and overwhelmingly sexy. He was good, thoughtful, and brave, and compassionate. The kind of man I'd never been sure I'd be able to have in my life. The kind of man I could fall in love with. Not just good, I was already falling right into those clear blue eyes. Well, as far as I'm concerned, anyone who thinks you're anything less than those other guys is an idiot, I said, for something to say, as well as being blind. Probably, Aaron said agreeably. I don't worry about it anymore, and I find it equally hard to believe that anyone could be around you and think you're anything less than a true shifter. It's in your blood. That's all that matters. The rest will fall into place. My fingers had curled into the front of his shirt without my even noticing. I tugged, and he came to me. He kissed me hard this time, nudging me a step backward so I could lean against the trunk of a tree, so I didn't even have to think about staying upright, only about the heat of his body against me and the slide of his mouth against mine. His hand traveled down my side to my thigh and back up to my shoulder, as if he wasn't sure what part of me he wanted to touch most. Everywhere. I wanted him everywhere. His hips brushed mine, and an ache started to form between my legs where Nate had gotten me off so skillfully less than a day ago. I whimpered as Aaron stroked my breast through another kiss, But one last thread of uncertainty held me back. I grasped the side of Aaron's face. He eased back. To meet my gaze, his was full of desire, so hot every nerve inside me caught fire. My voice came out ragged. "You don't mind, do you? That it's not just you that I'm supposed to be with the other guys too?" That I had been in ways he'd witnessed, or at least sensed. Aaron bumped his nose against mine in an affectionate nuzzle. "Not at all," he murmured. "You deserve nothing less. It takes more than one man to satisfy a dragon." His fingers teased up under my shirt. I arched my back off the tree trunk to give him room to unclasp my bra. He circled my nipple with his thumb before flicking right over it with a speed that made me gasp. "You deserve every bit of pleasure they can give you," he went on, moving to caress my other breast. He kissed the corner of my jaw, the sensitive skin of my throat. His words spilled out with his heated breath. "Anything that fulfills you, whoever it's with, fulfills me to the flesh in your cheeks. After you've been kissed, the sound you make when you come." So he had her Nate and me in the back of the car. My face outright flared. But God, Aaron was turning me on so much with every graze of his lips, every stroke of his fingers. "I'm looking forward to someday seeing how much pleasure we can bring you together," he said. But for now his hands slid down my body. I whimpered, my hips canting toward his, seeking every inch of contact I could get. "I need to see you," he muttered. He yanked my shirt up. I raised my arm so he could pull it off in one smooth movement. My bra slid from my shoulders to fall to the ground by our feet. Aaron took me in my smallish breasts with the nipples pebbled from his attentions, the flash creeping down between them. Then he ducked his head to suck one of those peaks into his mouth. I moaned, pleasure racing over my skin. His steady tongue slicked over my breast with the slightest graze of his teeth until I was trembling against him, my fingers tangled in his hair. He gave the nipple one last lick before tending to my other breast with equal enthusiasm. It wasn't nearly enough for the hunger inside me. I grasped the hem of his shirt off. I gasped. Now he wrenched it over his head faster than I'd have thought possible, with the snap of at least one button somehow that turned me on even more. I seemed to have no limit when it came to these guys. He claimed my mouth again with an urgent fervor. The press of his bare chest against mine drew another moan out of me. My fingernails scratched lines up the muscles of his back. He hefted me as if I weighed nothing at all, racing me higher against the tree, with one hand supporting my ass and my leg's blade. I gripped my thighs around his, the hard length of him pressed against my core, and I whimpered. Aaron rocked against me as he leaned in for another even deeper kiss. I could feel the strength coiled all through him, holding me up, but also braced to withdraw the second I told him to stop. Pleasure rushed through me, but suddenly the sweep of it didn't feel unnerving at all. I was exactly where I wanted to be. I belonged here with this man in every way he wanted to be with me. Giving into my desires wasn't letting go of control. It was taking it, grasping hold of the destiny I'd never imagined, and claiming it as mine. The second I made the decision, a hum of power rose up inside me, stronger than I'd ever felt before. I linked my arms behind Aaron's neck and dipped my head between one kiss and the next. "I want this," I said breathlessly. "I want you." He hesitated, searching my eyes, a wildness in his. "Do you mean Aaron?" I said as clearly as I could manage. "Be my mate." A strangled laugh burst out of him, as if he couldn't quite believe what I'd said. He crushed his mouth against mine, kissing me until I was dizzy. I fumbled with the button of his slacks, my hand brushing over his erection, and he groaned. "I think we'd better take this to the ground," he said, guiding me away from the tree. He grabbed his shirt and stretched it over the dirt before he laid me down in it. "For our first time anyway. Lots of time to experiment later," I said, and his eyes flashed even hotter. He kicked off his pants. I couldn't wait to touch his cock. The huge hard length of him pulsed against my palm through his boxers. Aaron bowed his head, exhaling with a stutter, holding himself over me. With one arm he dipped the other hand down between my legs. A mulling sound escaped me as he stroked me there. My breath broke into panting as he slipped his fingers under the band of my sweatpants. My sex was already slick with my arousal. He trailed his hand over that wetness and muffled another groan in my hair. "Please," I said. He didn't need me to beg more than that. He jerked off my pants and panties together and wrenched off his boxers. My hips arched up as he settled between my legs. The head of his cock rubbed over my opening. I pulled His mouth back to mine, he kissed me and eased inside at the same time. His hardness filled me with a burning sensation. But it was oh so good, I was filled completely. And it was everything I needed. You feel amazing serenity, he murmured between kisses. He lifted my hips higher and thrust into me with a steadily building rhythm. I clung to him as the swell of pleasure carried me higher up and up until it shuddered through my whole body, until I barely felt the ground beneath me. We were flying, soaring up and away on a haze of bliss. No leap or fall had come close to comparing to this acceleration. His cock nudged against the sweetest spot inside me, and the bliss shattered apart. It radiated through my entire body, tossing me even higher. I gasped, digging my fingernails into his shoulders. Sparks flared behind my fluttering eyelids. The pull between us solidified into a solid glow that bound us together. It lit me up like a flare from the inside. Aaron's thrusts turned erratic. He pumped into me a few more times and moaned as he followed me over the edge. His body settled over mine, resting against me, but not pinning me down. Every inch of his naked skin aligned with mine. I traced my fingers back, up his neck and into his sweat-damp hair to draw him down for one last kiss. My muscles trembled with release and happiness. I had him, my eagle shifter, my alpha, my mate. 20 Ren. I woke up cuddled against Aaron on the middle seat of the SUV. Daylight was streaming through the windows. My head still felt fuzzy from not quite enough sleep, and various parts of my body ached, but in an enjoyable way. I had no desire at all to get up. I buried my head into the crook of Aaron's neck. The wonderful, salty, fresh smell of his skin filled my nose. We'd gotten dressed before we finally made it the rest of the way back to the car, but I hadn't been quite ready to let go of him. Yet it was a tight fit, our legs entwined in half of him on top of me, and yet I felt totally at home and tangled there with him, my mate. The knowledge thrummed through my veins. Only the first if I fulfilled my rule completely. But right now, one was plenty. Knuckles rapped against the window over my head. I blinked and peered up at it. Aaron brushed a kiss to my temple before raising his head. Marco looked in at us, his eyebrows arched. He opened the door a few inches to talk. Wolf boy found us some eggs. You'd better get up if you want to grab them before our resident bear eats them all. I'm leaving plenty for the rest of you, Nate said from somewhere behind him. Marco dipped his head and shut the door again. Did his expression look a little tighter than usual? Something about his stance had felt off. He wasn't upset seeing me with Aaron, was he? He knew how this was supposed to work just as well as the others did, probably. It was my insecurities messing with my head. Out of the four guys, Marco seemed the least likely to get possessive. The way he carried himself, the way he talked, I was pretty sure he hadn't let a little discomfort stop him from enjoying all the pleasures of the body with other women. While he waited those 16 years for me, Aaron straightened up, tugging me with him. He slid his fingers into my hair and kissed me again on the lips. This time, his mouth lingered against mine, just long enough for me to start wishing we could launch into a sequel to last night's activities right now. Then he pulled back with a sheepish smile. His blonde hair was delightfully rumpled. I couldn't resist ruffling it a little more for good measure. He laughed. I guess we really should get some breakfast. We don't know what's waiting for us in Sunridge, right? My giddiness faded as nervous anticipation coiled around my gut. I clambered out of the van. Nate looked up from where he was scraping at fried eggs on a metal sheet over the fire, the corners of his lips curling up when he caught my eye. Oh, he knew what I'd gotten up to with Aaron last night, all right. And from the slant of West's eyebrows, as he very definitely didn't meet my eyes, it was obvious the Wolf shifter did do well. We hadn't exactly tried to hide our new intimacy. What else did I expect? It was only going to get weirder as I accepted each of the others as mates too. Whenever I felt ready to do that, I had plenty of other bigger concerns to tackle. First, how far are we from Sunridge? I asked the camp at large. Aaron got out his phone to check the map, but West spoke up first. About 2 hours depending on the roads. Are you in a hurry, Sparks? I gave him a pointed look. I've been wanting to know what happened to my mother for 7 years, Wolfie, so yeah, I might be a little impatient. Marco snickered at the nickname, and Nate covered a gaffa. West glowered at me. I guess you'd better get eating then. Nate handed me a plate, and I gulped down the flame-cooked eggs with one of the rolls the villagers had sent us off with. We piled into the SUV. West and Aaron taking their original places up front. "Come join me, Princess of Flames," Marco said, patting the middle seat beside him, so I did as Nate climbed into the back and West started the ignition. The Jaguar shifter squeezed my knee briefly, just long enough to send a spark of heat up my leg. Marco grinned at me, looking more relaxed now. I smiled back, but the view beyond the windshield pulled my gaze away down the road where the forest-thin tall mountains rose. A faint dusting of snow gleamed on the highest of the dark gray peaks. Sunridge lay just beyond that first range. "Have you remembered anything that might explain why your mom sent us on this little road trip?" Marco asked. I shook my head. "I don't think she ever mentioned Wyoming. Are there any important shifter communities nearby?" "Not that I'm aware of. I'm sure the Dragon Shift has kept a few secrets to themselves." He took my hand as we drove on, idly trailing his fingers back and forth over my palm. But he didn't push for any more contact than that. As much as I enjoyed the warmth of his touch, I was too distracted to want more. 2 hours, and I might finally get some answers. I might even see Mom again. The jitters of anticipation returned, fluttering around my stomach. West eased on the gas as the road narrowed. It veered up, winding along a pass between 2 of the mountains. Stray rocks rattled against the SUV's undercarriage. The sunlight dimmed, hidden behind the southern peak. "There's someone on the road," Aaron said. West slowed the car even more. He hit the button to lower his window and inhaled to scent the air. I leaned forward, peering between the front seats. A figure was standing in our lane a few hundred feet ahead of us, a young guy who didn't look much past his teens. "He's one of us," West said, feline. By the smell of him, he glanced back at Marco. "Do you know him?" "Right," Marco drawled. "Because all us feline kin must know each other." He narrowed his eyes. "No, he doesn't look familiar. But that doesn't mean much. Can you tell if he's one of the rogues?" I asked. "How do you know who's can? And who isn't?" "Can take a mark of loyalty, like our alpha mark on their palms," Aaron said. "If someone once can goes rogue, the mark fades. We'll need to get closer to know." "I don't like this," Nate said from behind me. "It's too much of a coincidence." "I don't like it either," West said. "But some of my kin back in the village knew where we were headed. They might have passed on word if there was bad news from another group. I just can't run the guy over without knowing." "Well, you could," Marco said. "If he's anyone's, can he's mine. You have my full permission to plow right into him. If he's got half a survival instinct, he'll jump out of the way in time." "Right," West said with an obvious edge of sarcasm. "That'll really improve kin group relations." Marco dragged in a breath. "Whatever you want, Volf boy. He's just a bobcat. I'm sure between the 4 of us, we can take him if we need to. But could we take whatever all eyes the stranger might have lurking nearby?" My body tensed as we came up on the guy, the SUV rolling to a stop. I scanned the mountainside along the road. Nothing moved, but there were way too many crags and boulders that could be concealing an enemy. The guy started ambling toward the car. West glanced back at Marco. "As you pointed out, Jaguar boy, he be your kin. Go talk to him. If something goes wrong, I'm sure you can jump right back in the car." As we speed out of here, his voice was dry, but a thread of tension ran through it. He left one hand on the steering wheel, gripping it tightly. Aaron eyed the guy through the windshield in the back seat. Nate undid his seatbelt, preparing in case he needed to shift. I guessed we were all on high alert. Marco muttered something about ungrateful canines, but he got up and slid open the door. "Stay right there, Princess," he told me. He hopped out and sauntered up the road to meet the stranger. "K and Mark?" he asked. The guy started to raise his hand, and two sharp cracks split the air, the same sharp echoing sound I'd heard in my memory of my mother's desperate flight with me from our old home. The SUV hitched with a sputtering sound from one of the tires. Marco's shoulder jerked. He stumbled sideways, catching his chest just below his collarbone. Blood bloomed beneath his fingers. My heart stopped. Gunshots. That's what that sound was. The rogues didn't care about shifter law, obviously. They'd brought guns to this fight, and to that one long ago. Marco West Howard. He pressed on the gas pedal, but the deflated tire thumped weakly against the pavement. "Shit, I'll get him. Stay low." He threw himself out of the driver's seat before anyone could protest. Another bullet struck the window across from me. The glass cracked. I flinched down, ducking beside the seat. Nate growled. Aaron wrenched off his shirt. "You're going to shift," I said, panic jolting through me. "They'll shoot you out there." Two more cracks rang out with a thunk against the side of the SUV and a snarl on the road outside. where was West? Had he gotten to Marco? How many rogues were in on this ambush? It's a lot harder to hit a moving target, Aaron said. He shot me a quick look, his bright eyes intent. Stay down, we'll take care of this, he lapped out, slamming the door behind him. A flash of golden feathers rocketed past the window. An instant later, a hiss and a yelp carried from down the road. My alphas, or the rogues. I didn't dare raise my head high enough to peek out the window, and it takes more than a few bullets to stop a bear. Nate growled. He shoved open the back hatch, shifting as he went. His immense furry body charged past my window into the fray. Another shot crackled. I winced, my fingernails digging into the leather seat. My heart thudded so fast the beats blended together. A voice, thick and guttural, called out from somewhere above. Give up, the dragon shifter can bound, and you'll live to keep bossing your people around. The words struck a chord of recognition deep down in the animal core of me. I'd never heard that voice speak before, but it jolted me back to the first rogue attack, the snarls and growls of the black wolf that had tried to gouge open my neck, the skin there stung in memory. I swallowed hard. He must be the one leading this group. But my alphas obviously weren't interested in bargaining my life away. The snaps and cries from down the road were getting louder. A high keening filled the air, Aaron's battle cry, and cut off abruptly. My throat constricted. The rogues had killed for alphas once before. My fathers, they'd murdered my sisters, to slaughtered almost all of the people who'd mattered most to me. And now they were trying to take away my mates to get at me. No, rage bubbled up inside me. My fingers curled tighter, forming fists. I dragged in a breath, slow and steady, the way Aaron had taught me, and the anger streamed through me in a white-hot glow, as powerful as the connection that had solidified between him and me when I'd claimed him as mine last night, when I'd grasped the role I was meant for with both hands. The energy rippled through all my limbs. I was not going to let this happen again. Not here, not now. I would not stay. My alphas deserved a mate who could protect them as much as they protected me, and damn it, they had won. I dashed forward to grasp the door handle, yanking the side door open. I flung myself out of the car, out and up. The shift rippled through my muscles, stretching, burning my body, expanding. Sleek and Senai talons ripped from my arched fingers. Wings burst from my back. They flapped with an instinctive heft, and I corned through the air. My eyes sharpened. The wind warbled over the smooth scales, covering my skin. Fire smoldered all through my extended neck. I'd done it. I was a dragon, and it felt amazing. I beat my wings, soaring higher, testing every inch of my newfound body. But I didn't have time to savor the sensations. My shadow streaked over the ground, twice as large as the SUV, and my gaze caught on a woman crouched by a boulder 30 feet up the mountainside. A pistol was braced in her hands. She raised it toward me. Fiery confidence blazed through me. Oh no, she could forget that she was going to regret ever messing with me and mine. I dove toward her. She pulled the trigger. A splinter of pain lanced through one of my wings, but I didn't care. I opened my jaws and let loose, the fire searing through me. The woman screamed as the flames engulfed her. I swooped over her hiding spot and whipped around, seeking out her companions. There'd been to guns firing. Where was the other coward hiding behind a pistol there? A gray-haired man hungered down in a crevice on the other side of the road. Not a pistol, but a rifle poised against the dark rock. I swung toward him. He proved himself an even bigger coward. Dropping the gun, he shifted into a black and gray speckled weasel and darted away up the mountain. I sped after the weasel's shifter, but he dove into a deeper crevice. I blasted it with fire and then spun around. My gaze narrowed on a man with shaggy black hair who was leaping to snatch up the rifle. Keep at them, he hollered down the slope in the same guttural voice I'd heard, demanding that my alphas hand me over. His scent laced the air with a wolfish tank. It was him, the rogue who'd left me marked all over with the slashes of his claws, who'd led his followers to savage Kylie to anger surged up inside me. I was never letting him get a chance like that again. The Wolf shifter swung toward me, yanking the rifle upward as if he thought he might catch me by surprise. A hot, heavy blast of dragon fire was already searing up my throat. I opened my jaws and let it flow. My fury blasted over the rogue's leader, leaving nothing but a charred heap and the molten lump of the rifle where he'd been. A twist of brutal satisfaction filled my chest. I wheeled toward the road. A few of the other rogues were already fleeing, racing up the mountainside. the way they'd come. The young man who'd stopped our SUV sprawled on the pavement, his chest torn and his throat gashed open. My wolf and my eagle had pinned a black bear to the ground between them. My grizzly was cuffing a mountain lion across the head. It bolted away as my shadow swept over them. I couldn't see Marco. I turned again, meaning to give chase, and a prickling sensation raced through my muscles. They were clenching, condensing the effort of the shift catching up with me. I strained to hold my shape, but exhaustion gripped me. It was my first time I had no stored endurance. Greeting my teeth, I plummeted to the ground. 21 Aaron Serenity. The shout echoed in my head as I saw her brilliant body fall from the sky. My eagle's throat couldn't form the name. My talons loosened where I gripped the bear's shoulder, the urge to fly to her rushing through me. The black bear had gone limp in my and West's grasp, but now it lashed out its paw, and one last desperate smack its claws raked across one of my wings. A lance of pain joined the other aches already radiating through my body. I bobbed to the side and slashed at the bear, torn between two duties. Nate lumbered over, baring his teeth threateningly at the rogue. They could have been his kin. He swung his head toward me as if to say go. On my wounded wing faltered. As I pushed myself backward, I landed awkwardly on my clawed feet and shifted back into human form. Bleeding claw marks scored my right arm, and a burning gash ran across my ribs, clenching my jaw. Against the discomfort, I pushed myself toward my mate. Serenity had hit the pavement on her hands and knees, somewhere between human and dragon form. The dragon side of her had saved her from the worst of the impact. She was slumped a few feet from the SUV when my eyes found her, and my pulse lurched. Before I'd even dashed 2 steps, she raised her head. A bullet wound was leaking blood down her forearm, and a scrape marked her chin from the impact, but her amber eyes glinted with a deeper fire than I'd ever seen. Before it took my breath away, I dropped to my knees beside her and pulled her to me. She sagged into my embrace, her cheek against my collarbone. Her chest was still heaving with ragged breaths. "You were fantastic," I said, stroking my hand over her dark hair. "The most spectacular thing I've ever seen." My heart swelled with the memory of her bright red scales flashing against the sky. My mate, my dragon shifter, and she'd accepted me as her own last night. The awe of it filled my throat. Serenity's hand brushed over my wounded arm and stilled. She pushed herself upright, her eyes widened. "You're hurt. We have to get you bandaged up. Is everyone else okay?" "We all survived," I said, "and I'll heal." But she was right. I'd lost more than enough blood already. I heaved myself to my feet, reluctant to leave her. Moving to the car, I grabbed my pants and tossed my shirt to her, since her own had ripped apart with her transformation. The shreds of it lay on the road. By the open door, there was a roll of sterile gauze in the glove compartment for exactly this eventuality. I wrapped up my arm and knelt beside Serenity to tend to her own wound. She winced as I covered it. "Fucking bullets. That's how they came after my family." Before I heard the shots in one of my memories, just didn't realize what they were until now. The set of my mouth hardened. It's a stark line for them to cross. Any shifter who's broken that law, used a weapon against their own kind, can never join a kin group in future. I get the impression that Lot is more interested in tearing apart our groups than joining them, Marco said, propping himself against the hood of the car. He bowled his own shirt against the bullet hole on his upper chest. The wound hadn't stopped him from shifting into jaguar form and taking care of the bobcat shifter who tricked us and then attacked him. Nate had shoved him toward the shelter of the SUV after that. "Rogues don't usually like to completely throw away their other options," I muttered. Serenity moved to stand, and I straightened up with her. West and Nate had both shifted back, so had the black bear shifter, who was now a woman sprawled limply on the road. The blankness of her half-open eyes dampened my relief. "She's dead." "Damn, she took one of the bullets meant for us," West said, nodding to a bloody mark on her chest. "Managed to fight like she wasn't dying for long enough despite it." Bloody scores marked his chest just below the glowing splatter of a scar I knew had been left by Fey magic. He hurried to the SUV to grab his clothes, shooting me a pained look as he passed. I was hoping we'd get some answers to our dragon. Shifter was staring at the woman. She bit her lip. She'd taken lives with her dragon fire a few minutes ago, but seeing a dead body up close wasn't something Serenity was used to. "I got their leader," she said, jerking her gaze away. "The Wolf Shifter who attacked me in the village, he's a pile of ashes up there now. She jabbed her hand toward the mountain slope. I tried to catch the ones that were running to Nate's eyes darken. You did everything you could, Ren. I've never seen any other shifter hold their form that long the first time. They made a full transition. Oh, she blinked. Then a small smile crossed her lips. Nate followed West to the car. We had to get moving before any humans showed up. The road wasn't frequently traveled, and we'd left the last town several miles behind. But that didn't mean there hadn't been anyone around to hear the gunshots. Serenity pulled my shirt closer around her shoulders. They still wanted me dead. She said apparently 16 years of chaos wasn't enough for them. West muttered. Marco's lips curled. You put them right in their place, though. Princess blasted them all to cinders. We couldn't know what other rogues might be out there who were just as set on destruction, but I didn't want to say that, not as I watched Serenity draw her back a little straighter. She glanced around at us as the others returned, looking every bit of princess in that moment, every bit of queen. This was a victory, and it belonged to her. I felt in the hum of energy passing between us, my alpha equals responding to her power. We were all in this all the way. None of us were backing down, not even West. It felt good. It felt right. Then let's get on with whatever the rogues were trying to stop us from doing here. Serenity said, there's just one thing I need to do first. She turned to me and reached to cut my jaw, pulling me into a kiss. I was more than happy to return. I kissed her back with all the passion and reverence I had in me until a tremble passed through her body. Everything, the danger, the wounds just starting to heal across my body, was worth it for this. Ren. I eased back from Aaron, breathless, but I wasn't done yet. I reached for Marco next. My Jaguar shifter came, easily sliding his arm around my waist. As he tipped his face to mine, he kissed me long and deep with a teasing caress of his tongue. Of course Marco would slip that in. Nate was there waiting for me. When I stepped back from Marco, I joined my hands behind the bear shifter's neck, and he pulled me up to meet him with his broad arms. His kiss was firm, but sweet, with a lingering brush of his lips over mine before he let me go. Last I turned to my Wolf shifter. West's stance had tensed. He eyed me wearily, but heat smoldered inside his gaze. He wanted me despite himself. We all felt the same pull. I held out my hand to him. It's just a kiss, not a contract. I need to know you're with me, at least that much. He wet his lips. The gesture sent a flicker of desire through me. All right, Sparks, he said, you can have your kiss. After that, I expected him to give me nothing but the briefest of packs. He stepped closer, bringing the smells of the forest with him, rich earth and sharp pine. My heart beat a little faster. He bowed his head, and I bobbed up on my toes to tentatively press my mouth to his. A hungry sound reverberated in his chest. His hand found my waist, hot as a brand. As he yanked me to him, he kissed me so fiercely that my head spun for an instant. There was nothing but the heat of him and the demanding pressure of his lips. West released me just as abruptly. He backed up, folding his arms over his chest in a familiar standoffish pose. Let's go then, he said gruffly, holding my gaze for a moment before jerking his away. The sharp taste of him lingered on my lips. I had let out my breath, feeling as if I'd finally fully settled into my body, the body of a dragon shifter surrounded by the fur alphas who'd be my mates. Yes, I said, let's. After a brief delay, while Nate and West swapped out the shot tire with the spare from the back, we set off down the road again. The mountains pulled back around a wide valley, with the glittering river down its center. Sun Ridge lay on the south bank, a small town of a few thousand inhabitants. I peered out the window as we cruised down the main street, waiting for something to hit me. Aaron glanced at me expectantly. I shook my head. Nothing. They've got a town historical museum, Nate said, pointing. That seems like a good place to start. West parked outside the repurposed house. The woman at the front desk looked at us curiously as we walked in. Her badge marked her as a volunteer for the Sunridge Historical Society. How much history could a town this size have? We wandered between the displays, weathered newspaper articles, old black and white photos, pieces of clothing belonging to some particularly exceptional mayor who, as far as I could tell, had simply built a new bridge over the river. Not exactly gripping stuff. I was about to call it quits when my gaze caught on a painting that filled one corner of the back wall. My pulse stuttered. I walked up to it. A strange feeling of recognition prickled through me. I'd never seen the image before, but somehow I felt as if I knew it. It was a simple design showing the sprawl of the snow-capped mountains. But in the center between two of the ridges, a spark shot up like a flame toward the sky. I reached for it, catching myself just short of touching the canvas. "Do you like that?" the historical volunteer asked, coming up behind me. She gave me a soft smile. "It's an interpretation of a larger piece in the town square. If you want to see the original." "Yes," I said so enthusiastically her eyebrows twitched up. "Where's that?" "It's a quick walk from here," she said. "Just take a left when you go out, walk 2 blocks, then another left, and you'll see the square." "Thanks." I rushed for the door. The guys fell in behind me. "Did you find something?" Nate asked. "I think so. Come on." I hurried down the street along the route the woman had given me. We stepped into a tiny cobblestone square with only a few buildings on each side and an inn at the far end. In the middle of the square stood a dark gray stone obelisk twinkling with specks of mica. It towered at least half again as tall as me. The same image from the painting was carved into its flat surface. It drew me to it until I was close enough to touch. This time I let myself lay my hand on the cool stone surface. It seemed to tremble beneath my palm. A crash of memory swept the world away. No, not memory, because the image of my mother that rose before my eyes wasn't one I'd ever seen before. She was standing in front of that obelisk, her brown hair shining in the sun, wearing the same dress she'd had on the last time I'd seen her. My chest squeezed. She'd left this message for me 7 years ago, when she'd stood in this exact same spot. "Serenity," she said, her bright voice wavering from right inside my ears. I wish I had more time to say everything I should. I don't know how far ahead of them I've managed to stay, so all I can tell you is this: I want to give you everything you need to survive the many challenges I know are ahead of you. Our people left a power in this place centuries ago. If I haven't returned to bring it to you, there's still a chance you can retrieve it yourself. For you to have made it this far, you must be so strong already. She touched the image of the flame between the mountains. "Here is where you'll find it. Your dragon nature will help you follow the path." Then she gazed straight into my eyes. "I love you. Never forget that." The image whispered away. I found myself braced against the stone, my eyes swimming with tears. "Ren," Nate said tentatively. I inhaled shakily and swiped at my eyes. "I'm okay," I said. "I know what we need to do. I know why my mother sent us here. There's something here I need if we're going to fix all the damage the rogues have caused." I backed up, looking at the picture, and then the mountain ranges around us. There I stopped when my gaze settled on a matching pair of peaks. The sun was high above them now, but it would gleam between them like a flame. When it was first rising, I raised my hand. "We're going up that mountain." This concludes Dragon's Guard by Eva Chase, narrated by Felicity Monroe and Joe Arden. Copyright 2017 by Eva Chase. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Eva Chase, care of Hirschman Rights Management, LLC, and was produced in the year 2018 by Tantor Media Incorporated, a division of Recorded Books, which holds the copyright there. To please visit tantor.com for more information on our growing library of unabridged audiobooks. Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Dragon's Tears, a reverse harem paranormal romance by Eva Chase, narrated by Felicity Monroe and Joe Arden. One Ren, if someone had told me a week ago that soon I'd be shopping for camping gear with the 4 hottest guys in existence, I'd have called up the Looney Bin to collect them. But there I was in a little shop in a town I'd never heard of until 2 days ago, doing my best not to melt as one of those gorgeous guys helped me into a downfield jacket. His fingers skimmed my chest, sending a pleasant shiver over my skin. It wasn't just Aaron's touch that had me on the verge of puddledom. The late June sun was shining brightly through the shop's windows, and the still air between the racks of outdoor clothes, backpacks, and other gear was thick with warmth. I squirmed inside the jacket. "Are you sure I need to be this suited up?" Aaron smiled at me with a mischievous glint in his bright blue eyes. Between those baby blues and his golden blonde hair, he could have passed for a Disney prince. Although I wasn't sure I'd ever seen a Disney hero quite that buff, I'd definitely never seen one who could make me tingle between my legs with just a glance. "You said you're not sure how far into the mountains we'll need to go," he said with the faint rasp that gave a little flavor to his even voice. "It'll be a lot colder at the higher altitudes, and we wouldn't want our princess of flames getting frozen," Marco drawled, leaning against a rack With his usual crooked grin, it fit the rakish playboy vibe he already had going on, with his spiky black hair, the little scar through his arched eyebrow, and his refusal to take any situation completely seriously. His indigo gaze swept over my body, sending a fresh wave of heat through me. His grin widened. As sad as I am, to see you covered up, of course, I glowered at him as I shrugged the jacket off. I'm sure you'll survive without a view of my cleavage for a few days, Marco chuckled. I do have the rest of my life to appreciate it after that. Oh yeah, that was the detail I'd have found hardest to swallow before my life turned upside down. About a week ago, the four guys doing their shopping with me were all shifters, and not any old shifters, but the alphas of their respective kin groups. Marco could turn into a sleek black jaguar. He ruled over the feline kin as leader of the avian shifters. Aaron's animal side was an impressive golden eagle, and me, I discovered I was a dragon shifter, one of only two left in the world. If my mother was still alive, if she wasn't, then I was the very last, and my job was to unite shifter kind by taking all for alphas as my mates. No pressure or anything. There were worse things than being expected to hook up with for completely smoking hot guys, don't get me wrong, but for a girl who'd never gotten past second base in the first 21 years of her life, and who'd had no idea shifters even existed, all that attention could feel a little overwhelming. I slung the jacket over my arm. It fits, and it's comfortable, and I want to get going. I'll take this one. It had been 7 years since my mother had passed through Sunridge, Wyoming, and left her message for me with an enchantment on the town monument. But I didn't want to wait a second longer than I had to before I found out what had happened to her. After Nate ambled over a couple of rolled sleeping bags tucked under his brawny arms, his bare side came through in his tall, well-built body and his chestnut brown hair. But his expression when he looked at me was all gentle warmth. He might be a grizzly when we were under attack, but with me he was a total teddy bear. Do you figure we'll be up there over at least one night, Ren? He said. His rich baritone voice never failed to warm me up to, I'm not really sure. I admit it, we'd ended up here in Sunridge after following a trail of clues. My mother had left me when I'd touched the obelisk in the town square. I'd gotten a vision of her telling me there was something I needed to find up one particular mountain, some kind of power she'd gone to retrieve 7 years ago. She'd never come back. I'd spent all those years with no idea where she'd gone or what had become of her. Really getting some answers about that mattered more to me than any special powers. I could transform into a dragon, a big, fast, fire-breathing dragon. Wasn't that enough? The thought sent an anxious tremor up my arm. Before I'd quite realized what I was doing, my hand had snatched a metal carabiner out of a basket and tucked it into my sleeve. Damned pickpocket instincts, they always kicked in. When I was nervous, I pulled it out and set it back in the basket with a flush of embarrassment. But thankfully none of the guys commented on my slip. It'll be better for us to bring more supplies than what we need. Than not enough, Aaron said to Nate. He was the most practical of my guys, which I appreciated a heck of a lot when I had so much still to learn about shifter abilities and limitations. Sleeping bags will be a lot more comfortable than just the blankets we've got in the SUV. He turned, looking toward the fourth member of my alpha squad. Didn't you say there's a tent in the trunk west? The Volf shifter nodded, where he was lurking near the shop's front door. The sunlight streaming in caught on the silver strands mixed with his light auburn hair. Like his animal, he was all lean muscle on display now, with his arms crossed over his firm chest. West was frowning, but that didn't mean much. He frowned at pretty much everything, especially if it had anything to do with me. He made it very clear that he wasn't on board with this whole destined to mate with the dragon shifter idea just yet. I guessed I couldn't exactly blame him, considering the chaos that shifter tradition had apparently thrown the kin groups into when my mother had disappeared from the community with me 16 years ago. I wouldn't have minded him remembering that I'd had nothing to do with the decision to leave before he turned his gruffness on me. Though I'm not sure the tent we have is big enough for the 5 of us. But with the trouble we've had getting here, we'll probably want a couple of us on watch at any given time. Anyway, West said, there's nothing to carry it with, though we'll need to grab some packs. I'm assuming we're not going to be able to drive right up to this dragon shifter treasure. His dark green eyes slid to me with that last sentence. I don't know. I said this track wasn't my idea, believe me. I wish my mother had given us more detailed instructions. To we're all following you in this, Sparks," he muttered. "Keep that in mind. I think it's a safe assumption that we'll have to go part of the way on foot." Aaron broke in calmly, his practical side made him a good peacemaker too. "And we'll want to pick up food for the trip since we can't be sure of the hunting." I saw a decent-sized grocery store on our way into town, Nate said. "Perfect." I carried my jacket over to the counter. "I hope you all have good credit, especially since I didn't even own a credit card. I'd only just gotten off the streets a couple of months ago." Marco chuckled. "Don't worry, princess money is not an object for any of us." He paid for our new gear, which thankfully Sunridge had in large supply, being so close to prime hiking and camping ground. Then we drove over to the grocery store. I stayed in my seat as the guys started to clamber out. "Grab me some spicy beef jerky and Doritos if they have them," I said. "Otherwise, I trust your judgment. I want to give Kylie a heads up before we're potentially out of cell tower range." Nate's head snapped around. "You shouldn't hang back alone. I'll stay in the car with you." I was tempted to tell him I'd be fine, but the fact was I might not be. We'd already been attacked by a group of rogue shifters on our way into town, presumably the same group that had killed my fathers and my sisters all those years ago. That was what had sent my mother on the run with me. You couldn't really blame her considering the circumstances. I'd managed to complete my shift into a dragon for the first time to fend off today's attack, and I'd totally fried their apparent leader, but a few of them had gotten away, and we didn't know for sure how many others there might be around. The rogues didn't play by shifter rules. They were willing to use weapons on their own kind, even guns, which the alphas had told me was strictly forbidden. Shifters healed quickly, but the sealed wound on my arm where I'd caught a bullet still ached. So I smiled at Nate and said, "Sure, just don't be offended if I'm giving all my attention to my phone." Nate reached over the back of the seat to squeeze my shoulder. "I wouldn't get in the way of you talking to your friend." The bear shifter stayed behind me while the other guys headed into the store. I pulled out my phone. "Hey Kai, how are you?" Feeling my best friend had been with us a couple days ago during the first attempt the rogue shifters had made on my life. They nearly killed her, which was why I'd insisted she head home to Brooklyn once she'd healed up. Instead of coming along with us, she texted back almost immediately, "I'm doing good. I'd say 95% at this point." She added a winking emoji. "Should be 100% by tomorrow." "What have you been up to? Did you make it to Sunridge? What did you find there? I need answers." I had to smile. Kylie's hyper energy came through clearly. Even in text form I could picture her so easily lounging on one of the porch chairs in the shifter village where she'd been recovering, grinning as bright as her neon pink pixie cut. As I tried to decide what to say, my smile faded. I didn't really want to worry my bestie by telling her about the second attack, especially when she was too far away to do anything. She'd already come running to my rescue once. Right now she needed to focus on making sure she stayed okay. But there was one thing I had to share. I managed a full shift this morning. You're talking to a bona fide dragon now. Holy shit, that's amazing, Ren. I so cannot wait for you to demonstrate for me first thing when I get back. But we might be gone for a while longer. My mom left another message for me here. There's this stone with a picture on it that seems to be tied to the dragon shifters somehow. Another trail for us to follow. Any sign of your mom herself?" Kylie asked. I bit my lip. "No, it doesn't really look good the way she talked in the message she left. It sounded like someone was after her, and that she planned on coming back to me if she could. So, since she didn't, I'm so sorry, Ren. But maybe it's not as bad as it looks." I wanted to think that so badly, that mom was imprisoned or forced into deeper hiding, or something else that had stopped her from returning to New York City, something other than her being dead. But the farther we came, without finding any recent trace of her presence, the harder it got. "I'll keep hoping until I know for sure," I wrote. "But anyway, we might be out of service range for a few days, so don't worry if you don't hear from me. Just keep looking after yourself. I'm on it. You take care of you too. Although it's hard to be too worried when I know you've got those 4 hunks of manliness chomping to defend you and get it on with you. Any progress in that area, devil?" Emoji. I rolled my eyes, but my cheeks had flashed at the same time. There had been I taken my first major step toward claiming my destiny, as leader of the shifters last night by officially claiming Aaron as my mate. In other words, we'd had sex, really good sex that still sent a giddy quiver through me when I thought back to it. But talking about my first time via text just felt wrong, that kind of girl talk I wanted to have face to face with my bestie moron. That when I get back I wrote a way to leave a girl hanging. I want all the deeds the second I see you. I promise there might be a lot more details by the time I got to hang out with Kylie again to take on my full role as dragon shifter. I was supposed to be getting fully intimate with all 4 of the guys, and Marco and Nate at least had shown plenty of enthusiasm in that area, but just losing my the 5th card had been a big step, as much as I was drawn toward all of the guys. Even West, I wasn't about to jump in the sack with all of them at once just like that. As appealing as that image suddenly was, exactly how many guys could you get it on with at the same time? I was feeling a little hotter than I could blame on the sun. When the other 3 alphas returned with their haul, they tossed the grocery bags in the back with the rest of the gear and piled in. I taken the front passenger spot since I was the one with the best idea where we were going. As shaky as even that was, Aaron, who'd spent the most time eyeballing the maps, took the wheel. The road goes about a quarter of the way up the mountain. Before taking a sideways route around it, he said, "Let me know if you sense anything along the way that tells us which direction we should take or where we should stop." I nodded. All thoughts of bedroom type activities faded into the back of my mind behind a jittering of anticipation. I didn't know what was waiting for us in the mountains, but based on the way Mom had talked in the vision she'd left for me, I was sure this was the end of the path. I'd have my answers soon. Aaron turned the car toward the mountain with the dual peaks, the one that matched the carving on the obelisk. The carving had shown a flame between those peaks as well. I guessed that was how the sun must look as it rose and flared between them, and maybe the image hinted at the power Mom had said was hidden there. You've done all that reading into shifter history, I said to Aaron. Do you have any idea what kind of power my mother could have been talking about? He shook his head. The dragon shifters have always kept some things to themselves. It's such a close bond from mother to daughters over the centuries. Just that one line that all of shifter kind revolves around. It makes sense that they'd have their secrets. Such a close bond. Mom and I had always been close for sure. We'd only had each other the 9 years we'd lived in hiding together in New York City, but we hadn't bonded over our dragon shifter natures. She'd locked all my memories of that part of our lives away along with my powers. They were only just starting to trickle back. I had to assume she'd only been trying to protect me, but now that I needed my powers I couldn't help wishing she'd found another way. A nagging sensation crept over my skin as the road rose to follow the slope of the mountain. It was more than anticipation, now a faint pull tugging me toward the slope, urging me upward, as if I were being called by someone who knew me and wanted to welcome me back. Dragon shifters do seem to have excellent taste in dramatic scenery, Marco remarked behind me. The high mountain range that surrounded Sunridge spilled out all around us, starkly majestic. The road wove back and forth as it climbed the mountain and then veered sharply to the left. We'd only driven a few seconds longer when the faint pull I'd felt turned into a pinching tug. Stop, I said. Aaron glanced over at me and hit the brake. Did you see something? He said. Not yet, but there's something here. I can feel it. He pulled onto the shoulder a short distance along the road where a low fence surrounded an overlook. I hopped out of the SUV the second it had stopped moving. My sneakers started against the pavement. As I hurried across the road I followed the steep rock face on the other side back to the sharp left we'd taken here. The pull urged me upward. I gripped the uneven surface of the rock and hauled myself up the steep slope. I might not have full command of my shifting abilities yet, but I'd had a shifter's strength and agility with me my entire life. After what would be a quick scramble up the rock face, the slope evened out. A shallow hollow ran through the stone, slanting slightly upward. The second my gaze rested on that hollow, the nagging sensation crept deeper into my lungs. That was our path. I knew it down to my bones. My alphas had gathered at the edge of the road beneath me. I jumped back down. The exhilaration of the leap wasn't quite as thrilling now that I'd experienced actual flight. Damn, I couldn't wait to get back into my dragon form. It was too bad I'd only been able to hold it for a few minutes. That first time I'd have to work on my endurance. We need to go that way, I said, pointing farther up the mountain west of the slope, and Grimace, good thing we're only bringing the one tent. Marco gave him a light punch to the shoulder, quit grumbling, and helped me pack up. Wolf boy, my heart sank a bit as they sauntered back to the SUV. All four of them were following this path for me because I said it was important, but I really didn't have a clue what was waiting for us up there. I don't know how far we'll have to go, I said. It could be a long track. We're prepared for that, Aaron said with a reassuring smile. Your mother led us here for a reason. Nate squeezed my shoulder. We all believe in you, Ren, even West, no matter how grouchy he's being about it. Your instincts won't lead us wrong. I turned toward the tallest of my alphas, drawn to the solid heat of his body. Nate seemed to know exactly what I needed. He wrapped his brownie arms around me in a hug, ducking his head next to mine. The brush of his cheek against my temple set a flare of a completely different kind of need through me. I eased back just enough to raise my head and bring my lips to his. Nate leaned into the kiss, returning it firmly but tenderly. The heat of him washed right through my entire body. Oh yes, a very large part of me was looking forward to getting completely acquainted with all of my guys, but now was obviously not the time for that. I kissed him one more time, hard enough that he rumbled with pleasure deep in his chest, and then I made myself step back. My cheeks were flushed, but I suddenly felt twice as steady. Let's get our gear and get going to Ren. Several hours up the trail, I was starting to wonder if we'd really needed to bring quite so much stuff. I could survive without a sleeping bag, right? Who needed changes of clothes? What good was food? I knew the guys had given me the lightest pack, and it still felt like there was a ton of bricks weighing on my shoulders. Apparently, I needed to work on that endurance thing in more than just the shifting department. I hadn't had the opportunity to get a whole lot of practice mountain trekking in New York City. I didn't want to look like a wimp when my alphas were striding along like the effort was nothing, so I gritted my teeth and kept walking. I couldn't say I was upset when Aaron paused and touched one of the walls of rock that had gradually been rising on either side of us. They loomed over the path, now not so high they blocked out the sinking sun, but enough that there was no hope of taking a shortcut out there. Ben Fay up here, Aaron said. What? West pushed past Nate to stride over. Aaron pointed to a mark in the smooth rock, a couple of intersecting lines with a glow so faint I wouldn't have noticed it if he hadn't drawn my attention. West's shoulders tensed. The rest of us drew closer. It looks old, Marco said. They haven't charged that any time recently. Charged? I repeat it with magic. He waved his hand toward the lines. The Fae are big fans of making things shiny, so by Fae we're talking fairies, right? I guessed if shifters and vampires were real, there was no reason Tinkerbell shouldn't be to West. Cut his gaze toward me. Just like we're a far cry from werewolves. The Fae aren't anything like your fairy tales. They're nothing you want to mess with. They've had a kind of chip on their shoulder ever since human beings started taking over so much of their territory. Marco elaborated. They do love their privacy, but mountains aren't exactly their usual type of wilderness. They usually prefer places where things grow. Aaron studied the path ahead with a thoughtful expression. Nate set his hands on my shoulders. We've got to keep going either way. The sooner we find what we're looking for, the sooner we can leave and not have to worry about dealing with the fate at all. No one could argue with that. We started tramping along again, but we were all eyeing the stone walls a lot more carefully now. The path was maybe 7 feet wide, not a whole lot of room to maneuver if we had to fight, which West at least seemed to think was a possibility. But Marco said it was humans the Fae took issue with. How did the Fae feel about shifters? I asked. West made a sound somewhere between a grunt and a wordless muttering, as if he thought the question was ridiculous. Aaron ignored him. We used to have decent relations with them, he said. Our interests and needs are pretty different, but we share an appreciation for wild open spaces and privacy from humans. Unfortunately, we've had some clashes in the last several decades as humans expand their cities and towns. We end up having to move around. Nate put in, and the Fae are getting more protective of their territory. I've heard they used to be okay with us sharing ground when we needed to shift and let off some steam. And now there is likely to try to barbecue us, Marco said, but those tensions might get better once you're established in your role, princess. It's harder to maintain good relations when we're a little fractured even among ourselves. Had Mom ever talked about that when I'd been little? I reached back into my fragmented memories, the ones she'd buried. With her magic after we'd fled, they hadn't come back easy, and it was still hard to piece anything very coherent together. I slipped my hand into my pocket, at the same time closing my fingers around the locket she'd given me before she left. That last time, the one that had drawn my alphas to me, I'd had to stop wearing it around my neck to make sure the chain didn't snap. During an unexpected shift, I could feel a hint of the magic in the warm metal now whispering against my palm. It helped center my mind on those distant memories. An image swam up of Mom, standing at the edge of a forest talking with a tall, slender man whose skin was so pale, it looked almost blue. He had a faint sheen to him too, that lit up where the sun touched him. I was crouched in the grass, watching my heart hammering, both nervous and excited. Who is that? I asked Mom later. One of the Fae. She'd said I need to negotiate with them from time to time on behalf of our community. You won't see them very often though. She'd paused, her expression going distant. I suppose it's a little sad how little we interact, and how formally my grandmother told me that long ago the Fae and the dragon shifters shared a special connection, but that's faded now. Then she'd kissed my forehead and ushered me to the dining room for our dinner. A lump rose in my throat. I hadn't known her properly in the last 16 years, because she hadn't let me know her, and now that I knew who we were, I might never see her again in anything but a memory or a vision. A warmth brushed my skin, like the feeling of her presence when we'd sat shoulder to shoulder on our couch. At first I thought it was just because of my reminiscing, then my gaze fell on a small swath of parallel scratches dug into the rock wall. Just ahead, my pulse stuttered. I stopped as I reached them, running my fingers over the narrow crevices. A stronger sense of my mother's presence rippled over me. I could almost smell her, like Lila. And honey, my mother was definitely here, I said, when I could manage to speak. She must have shifted. She made these marks. I can feel her in them. That's pretty dainty work for dragon talons, Marco remarked. She probably meant for you to see them, Nate said, to know that she's with you here one way or another, right? And there was a chance whatever lay ahead would lead me the rest of the way to her. I squared my shoulders and the straps of my pack and strode on. Aaron made a humming noise that doesn't look good. My head jerked up with the question had hardly fallen from my mouth when I saw it down the path. A jumble of boulders had tumbled down to fill the gap between the walls. There must have been a rock slide, just what we needed, more climbing. But as we hurried closer, I realized our situation was more complicated than that. The highest boulders had fallen at an angle, jetting out over the lower ones. There was no way to climb that heap unless we could turn off gravity, which, as far as I knew, was not a skill any shifter was gifted with. We stopped at the edge of the landslide's shadow and peered up at it. Aaron rubbed his square jaw. Marco stalked from one side of the path to the other, looking very much the jaguar. In that moment, Nate moved to test one of the boulders within reach, as if he thought he could dig his way through, and West made a warning noise. Don't bring the whole damn pile down on our heads. We've got to get past it somehow, Nate said. I can fly, Aaron said, but I wouldn't be able to carry more than my pack in eagle form. He wasn't the only one who could fly. I can carry a lot more than that, I said. Hell, in dragon form I could blast that pile right down, so we don't have to deal with it on the way back. The sun was waning, and we hadn't seen another person since we'd left the road. I didn't think any humans would spot my dragon form all the way up here. Nate frowned. You only shifted for the first time this morning. You might not have recovered enough energy. Yet I shrugged off my pack and reached for the hem of my shirt. Shifting in clothes didn't get along so well, especially when you shifted into as large a creature as I did. Can't hurt to try, can it? Marco leaned against the rock wall with an amused smile. At for 1 a.m. going to enjoy watching that here, Aaron said. He found the padded jacket I'd bought and brought it over as I tugged off my shirt and bra. You won't be able to concentrate on shifting if you're freezing. Just keep it on your shoulders so it'll fall off when you make the transformation. Thanks. I tugged the jacket over me like a cape, thankful for both the warmth and a little bit of modesty, these guys had been stripping down whenever they needed to shift, regardless of who was around all their lives. It was going to take a little while for me to get used to the casual nudity side of shifterdom. I kicked off my pants and undies and knelt down so the jacket hung around most of my body. I had barely noticed the cooling mountain air on our hike up. It had been warm when we'd started, and then I'd been warm from the hiking. Now the chilly air seeped over my bare skin. I wouldn't mind it so much when I had scales. How could I bring them out? I shifted in the heat of battle before, desperate to protect my alphas. Before they died protecting me, we didn't face a threat anywhere near that urgent right now. How much could I even control that power? The doubts wriggled through my mind. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, trying to will them away. I knew the dragon inside me now. I knew what it felt like to expand into that body, to spread those wings. All I had to do was get back there. I thought back to the sensation of stretching muscles, of scales forming over my softer skin. But the memory didn't come alone. The crack of the gunshots echoed through my mind, cries of pain, all the awful sounds of the rogues' ambush. My back went rigid. No, that was no good. I had to let go of that stuff. I was a dragon. I had to just be one. If you can't manage it, we'll find another way. Nate said, don't push yourself. The hardest spark of annoyance lit in my chest. Why shouldn't I push myself? Weren't all of them pushing themselves on my behalf all the time? I wasn't some weakling who needed to be cuddled. I was a fucking dragon. That flare of determination shot through my body. Yes, that was what I needed. I held on to it and dove headfirst into the searing sensation, racing over my skin, into it and through and out and up, limbs expanding, neck extending, every part of me stretching free. My head lengthened into jaws lined with sharp teeth, a smoky flavor trickling on my tongue. Fire danced in my lungs. I launched myself up toward the sky, giddy. The shift pinched at my joints, but I didn't mind that little bit of strain. I'd done it. This was who I was. The wind buffeted me as I swooped around. I drank in the pleasure of flight for a moment and then dipped back down. I didn't know how long I'd be able to hold this form. I couldn't forget the whole reason I'd taken it on. Right now, the heap of boulders looked like pebbles to my dragon self. I dropped down over the highest one and grasped it between my hind feet. My talons closed around it and wrenched it off the pile. With a few flaps of my wings, I deposited it away from the path on the mountainside. One down, a dozen or so more to go. I tossed another boulder aside and another and another. The pinching I'd noticed earlier started to creep through my wings and chest. I'd already held the shift longer than last time. My body was getting worn out. Damn it, I wasn't done yet, but it handled the worst of it. I eyeballed the remaining pile, only half as high as when I'd started. My alphas had backed up to give me room. If I just took a good running start at it, I flew down the path the way we'd come. As I swung around, a flicker of movement caught my eye. I hesitated, peering down, but I couldn't see anything except shadows in the path below me. It had probably been the motion of my own shadow I'd seen. Gathering my strength, I raced toward the heap. As fast as my wings could flap, the air whistled past me. My expanded heart thudded with glee. My dragon lips parted in what must have been a dragonish smile. At the last second, I heaved my hind legs down and forward. I crashed into the pile feet first. The impact radiated through my body, but I hopped upright. Before I could fall on my back, the remaining boulders tumbled down the path with a rattling thunder spreading out so we'd be able to walk between them. Not a second too soon. That bone-deep exhaustion was rolling over me again. I sank down on the ground, hunching my back, shrinking into myself. The scales contracted back into my skin. In a moment, all that remained of my dragon form was the taste of smoke in the back of my mouth. My human body felt tired too, but not enough to dampen my sense of victory. I did it, I said, springing up. There you go. Path cleared. Dragon shifter at your service. I gave a little bow. Nicely done, Aaron said with a chuckle. Marco grinned and clapped his hands in a round of applause. Nate smiled proudly, and West's eyes were fixed on my body, which in my enthusiasm I'd forgotten was now completely uncovered. At my glance, his gaze jerked back to my face. In that first instant, as we stared at each other, hunger lingered in his expression, too intense for him to completely rein, and despite the cool air, a wave of heat washed over me. He turned with a snap, taking that heat with him. 3 Aaron When I ducked into the tent, Serenity was sitting cross-legged on her sleeping bag in the middle, grimacing at her phone. I sank down onto my own sleeping bag. At a right, is something the matter? Oh, I knew there probably wouldn't be much reception up here, but I was hoping I'd be able to update Kylie at least one more time before we lost it completely. She sighed and tucked the phone into her packs out her pocket. I guess I'd run out of charge before too long anyway. No handy electrical sockets up here. We've made good time, I said, sensing the distress under her joke. I'd seen her with her friend enough to know how much they relied on each other. Serenity could rely on the four of us, her alphas now. But of course it'd take time for her to adjust to that. She'd only just found enough trust to welcome me fully as her mate. That thought drew me closer to her. I leaned in, and an answering spark of attraction lit in her amber eyes. She lifted her head to meet my kiss eagerly. When I first met our dragon shifter, I'd wondered if the unshakable pull I felt toward her, to be near her, to touch her, to bring her pleasure, would ease off once our mate bond was consummated. It seemed the answer was no. Since last night, my desire for her hadn't eased off at all. I've managed to keep my equipment in my pants for 27 years, and now it was agonizing to imagine going even one night without hearing her moaning beneath me. She made a sound that was almost a moan now as I teased my tongue into her mouth. Her fingers trailed up my neck to tangle in my hair. She tugged me even closer. Sparks of pleasure raced over my scalp. I kept her jaw kissing her harder. Then I let my hand slip down over her shirt to caress her breast. The nipple peeked beneath my palm. A whimper crept from her throat. She arched into my touch encouragingly. Her curves were so soft under my fingers, but I could still feel the strength all through her body. The combination thrilled me. What a woman my mate was. I edged up the hem of her shirt to touch her skin to skin. Serenity let out a gasp against my mouth when my fingertips grazed the tip of her breast through her bra. Her fingers curled against my shoulders. Then she tensed. I eased back to see her face. Are you all right? Her mouth twisted. Desire burned in her eyes. I want to keep going, but West is supposed to be sleeping in the tent the first half of the night too, isn't he? He might come in while we're. She gestured between us with a crooked smile. It was going to take time for her to adjust to that aspect of our relationship. I stroked her cheek and the side of her neck. You know, if all goes well between the group of us, there will be moments in the future when the other alphas aren't just seeing you with me, they'll be joining in as well. She drew her legs up to her chest. I know it's still a little hard to wrap my head around. It's not like I've ever tried a threesome before, let alone a fivesome. If Serenity had grown up among the shifters, seeing her mother with her forefathers, she wouldn't feel this hesitation. And that was the fault of the rogues who ripped her family apart with their bloodshed. My jaw clenched for a second before I forced it to relax. The past was gone. As horrific as it had been, all we could do was move forward from there and make sure none of the rogues remained. Got another chance at harming the dragon shifter. We still had. Serenity didn't deserve to be rushed, but it wouldn't be right for me to encourage her to see me as her only maid either. I pressed a gentle kiss to our lips. We can give you time. Don't feel you have to rush things, and I'm here for you however you need me. But I think it'll be good for you to try to keep your mind open. Dragon shifters aren't meant for only one mate. I won't be enough to satisfy you on my own. The glint in her eyes turned mischievous. You're doing an awfully good job so far. She kissed me again, long and slow. Then she scooted her sleeping bag as close to mine as she could get. Hold me until I fall asleep. I lay down next to her and wrapped my arm around her waist, tipping my face next to hers. Until then and after Serenity ran. My toe caught on a ridge in the path, and I stumbled forward. A curse fell from my mouth, but I caught my balance before Nate's helping hand reached me. I'm okay. Whoever picked this route obviously wasn't too concerned about ease of travel, Marco said, raising his eyebrows as he took in our surroundings. A little redecorating might be in order. I couldn't argue. If I'd thought yesterday's hike had been difficult, today's was downright brutal. The path had veered sharply upward through the morning, and just after we'd stopped for a quick lunch, the walls above slanted together to form a ceiling overhead. We were walking through a cave, now a cave with a really uneven floor and only dim light from the occasional gaps in the ceiling. Our steps echoed faintly through the cavernous passage. The temperature had dropped at the same time. A damp chill brushed my face as I trudged on. I was very glad for that down jacket now, but the tug inside me kept urging me onward more insistently now than before. Whatever we were heading toward, we were definitely getting closer. Have you gotten any clearer sense of what we're looking for, how far ahead it might be? Aaron asked me. I shook my head. The feeling I have is still just a vague pull, but I know we're going the right way. If that feeling hadn't been enough to confirm it, just an hour ago I'd spotted another score mark where Mom's energy had lingered. She'd entered this cave 7 or so years ago, entered it, and left her mark for me to find. We'd also spotted a couple slivers of fey magic etched in the walls, although nothing the guys had thought was recent. Something split the hazy gray tunnel ahead of us. I squinted at it. After several more steps, I made out what it was: a seam of rock. The cave was splitting into two passages. I'm not much of a fan of mazes, West muttered. Neither was I, but as we reached the branching, the pool inside me tugged to the left. Clearly enough. We go that way, I said, pointing. No problem, I trust your instincts, Aaron said, but I don't like the additional possibilities for an ambush when there are multiple passages to move between. I think we should quickly scout out both sides, check for any signs of potential enemies. Fine, West said, stalking toward the passage to the right. Let's just get on with it. 15 minutes. And if you haven't seen any reason to worry by then, meet back up, Aaron called after him. He headed down the left passage, leaving me with Marco and Nate. The big bear shifter crossed his arms over his chest, looming over me as if there were some immediate threat I needed to be defended from. I appreciated that he wanted to look out for me, but sometimes his protectiveness felt a little smothering. I'm pretty sure there's nothing around here except for rocks, I said, unless there are some rock demons or something you guys haven't bothered to tell me exist. We should be fine. No rock demons, Marco said with a grin. As much as I might enjoy a little break, hiking does get monotonous. We've seen those signs that the Fae have been through here, Nate said. It's better to be cautious than to put you at risk. I couldn't say I exactly minded this kind of break. I set down my pack and rolled my shoulders. They throbbed with the motion. Need a little help with those, Marco said in a suggestive tone. I rolled my eyes at him and his grin widened. But I actually wouldn't mind a little assistance, working out the kinks in my muscles. Give them everything you've got, I said, shrugging my jacket down to give him better access. Marco's live hands settled on my shoulders over the fabric of my shirt. He dug his thumbs into my muscles with the perfect amount of pressure. I groaned at the burn spreading through my shoulders, and he chuckled. Suddenly the cave's air felt a whole lot warmer. A patterning sound carried from the other end of the cave. That the way we'd come. Nate's back went rigid. He turned toward it, his bulky arms flexing. No other sounds followed, but he didn't relax. It's probably nothing, I said, just a pebble falling off the ceiling. I should take a look to make sure, Nate said. Then he hesitated, his gaze moving to Marco. You'll watch out for Ren, of course, Marco said, sounding amused. Anyway, there's one of the rest of you in any direction. An enemy could come at us from. If you start screaming, we'll know to get moving. Nate glowered at the jaguar shifter and headed down the cave. Marco resumed my shoulder massage. It didn't take long before the bear shifters brawny form disappeared into the darkness. Marco leaned closer, letting his fingers dip down to my collarbone. We are finally alone, he murmured in my ear. A shiver of anticipation ran through me, even as I smiled. And what exactly are you assuming will happen now that we are? I make no assumptions, only offers. How would you like to spend the rest of our wait in a way we'll both enjoy very much? You think so highly of your abilities, I teased. Then his hands dipped right under my bra, tracing the sensitive skin just above the tips of my breasts, and my breath caught my body, moved of its own accord. I leaned back against him, tilting my head as he pressed his mouth to the side of my neck. For good reason, Marco said, his breath hot against my skin. It was so hard to resist the passionate need flaring up from my core, and why should I resist it? Like Aaron had said last night, all four of these guys were my mates. I needed to get more comfortable with all of them to open myself up, To the experience, I turned in Marco's embrace and yanked his mouth to mine. He kissed me, a hungry sound reverberating from his chest. His hands slipped up my back under my shirt and nimbly unhooked my bra as the cups loosened. He reached for my breasts again, swiveling his thumbs around my nipples and then flicking over them until I gasped. My hips canted toward his. He dropped one hand to grasp my waist and spun us around so he could lean me against the stone wall. His touch teased over my hips and thighs. I kissed him hard, not caring about the rough surface behind me, just wanting to feel more. Marco's lips moved away from mine to nibble a tingling line along my jaw. "Oh, my princess of flames," he said between nips. "You're amazing. There's no other word for it. I couldn't have imagined a better mate." I mumbled something inarticulate and encouraging, lost in the haze of pleasure. My eyelids fluttered. The light in the cave behind Marco seemed to flutter with them and to solidify into a humanoid form. We weren't alone anymore, for when a yelp broke from my throat, I jerked away from Marco and the figure beyond him, smacking the back of my head on the wall of the cave. Marco whirled to place himself between me and the figure in one smooth movement. What must have been an instinctive shout of warning burst out of him, but his shoulders came down when he set eyes on the strange woman. He drew himself up straighter. "You no, I really thought the Fae had better manners," he said. The Fae, yes. The woman standing at the other side of the passage was as slim and pale as the man I remembered. Mom talking to her. Skin, hair, and filmy dress had the same bluish shine, a little damp in here. In the dimness of the cave, I fumbled to fix my bra, my face flushing. This wasn't exactly how I'd have wanted my first meeting with fake kind to go down, not when I was supposed to represent the entire shifter community. The woman didn't look at all distressed or apologetic about the makeout she'd interrupted. Her expression was blandly blank. "I have a matter of some importance to relate to you," she said in a thin, shimmering voice. Footsteps were thudding over the stone floor on either side of us. Nate appeared first, then Aaron and West, all of them slowing to a halt when they saw our visitor. Marco waved them all over, but I saw his jaw was still set a bit tight. He wasn't completely at ease, no matter how nonchalant he liked to appear. How had the Fae woman gotten past all of the alphas? Was there some other passage we'd missed, or had it been some kind of magic? It didn't seem wise to ask the guys right in front of her. I didn't need her knowing just how ignorant I was about all things supernatural. West's lips had drawn back over his teeth in a wolfish snarl. His stance was completely tense. What are you doing here?" he gritted out. Nate stepped closer, towering over the slip of a woman. I could tell from his pose that he was braced to shift into his grisly form the instant he felt he needed to. Aaron set a hand on his arm, but the Eagle Shifter's eyes gleamed with a determined light. He might not want to rush into a confrontation, but he was ready for it. "Apparently she has some important info to pass on," Marco said and nodded to the Fae woman. "So go on." She cocked her head, consideringly taking in my alphas. "I come with the intention to help. There's no need to be defensive. We'll judge that for ourselves," West said. Aaron stepped forward, making a brisk motion toward the Wolf Shifter as if asking him to stand down. "We're listening," he said, his voice even, but not friendly. "What is it you wanted to tell us?" "We discovered one of your kind sneaking after you in the caves, carrying a weapon," the Fae woman said. "One with no ties to any of your kin groups. Clearly, he had ill intentions." A robe. My back stiffened. "Where's he?" "You don't need to worry about him any longer. We disposed of him in an appropriate manner." She moved her hand in an arc through the air and conjured an image like a hazy video recording floating in mid-air. A weasel scuttled along the wall of the cave. It had a small knife clamped in its jaws. A chill ran down my spine. I recognized that animal. One of the rogues who'd ambushed us in the mountain pass had transformed into a weasel to flee. I was sure that animal was the same one, so he'd been tailing us through the cave, carrying yet another forbidden weapon. The moment we'd all had our guards down, even for a moment, I had no doubt he'd have tried to finish the job the group of rogues had attempted before killing me. In the conjured image, a Feyman appeared in front of the weasel. His mouth moved, but the conjured display contained no sound. The weasel flinched and darted for a crevice. The man threw a bolt of searing light toward it. The bolt struck the weasel and consumed it in a brief blaze. When the light faded, nothing of our enemy remained. The Fey woman gestured again, and the image vanished. She spread her arms, as if to say, there you have it, we would rather have had him captured alive so we could have questioned him. Aaron said he managed to keep his tone even, but his rasp had become more pronounced. And why shouldn't he be upset? The weasel shifter might have been our enemy, but the Fae couldn't have been sure of his intentions. He'd been our business to deal with as we saw fit, and they just slaughtered him with a single swipe of magic. What if they decided we deserved the same treatment? He was not inclined to cooperate, as you could see. The Fae woman said my companion could feel the murderous intent in him. We believed we were doing you a kindness. She paused, and her feel-me eyes glittered in a way that set my nerves on edge. You are the alphas of the shifter kin, are you not? And the long-missed dragon. Shifter, I liked the way her gaze settled on me even less. Apparently, the guys all had the same feeling, because they drew closer around me at the same moment we are. Marco said, I guessed. She must have been able to sense their status, maybe through the oath scars on their hands. And she is. And as far as we knew, no one has made a direct claim on this mountain. I hope we aren't intruding. Not at all, the Fae woman said. But I thought her sheen jittered a little. We venture into the mountains from time to time, but we don't consider them truly part of our home. There's room enough for both, so this is basically a vacation spot for you, Marco said. He raised his eyebrows at the cave around us. You have interesting tastes. The landscape has qualities that appeal in their own way. I suppose you've noticed other signs of our presence on your travels. We didn't think you'd been here recently, Nate put in. Otherwise, we have reached out to you. Did you pass on word to your people elsewhere? The Fae woman asked. She gave us a demure smile. I know we've had our disagreements in the past. If there will be more shifters arriving, it would be best for us to know they're here on your request, to avoid any awkward encounters like a Fae deciding to incinerate another shifter. We aren't expecting anyone to join us, Aaron said. But please, if you come across another rogue lurking around, bring the matter up with us before taking any action. The Fae woman bowed her head in a way that didn't look all that apologetic to me. My skin prickled. Maybe the dragon shifters in the Fae had worked together long ago, but right now I didn't trust them at all. Is there any particular reason you're here now? West asked, his voice tight. He obviously shared my sentiments. We were simply passing by and noticed you doing the same. The Fae woman tipped her head. All four of the alphas and their long-lost mate up here together. You must be making this trip on a matter of some importance. She said it as a statement, but the question was clearly implied. My hands clenched. She claimed she was helping us, but ever since I had screamed that she had other intentions, I had no interest in sharing my mother's story with her. Serenity is still adjusting to her new role, Aaron said. He was the only one who called me by my full name, the name my mother had urged me to keep secret the entire time we'd been in hiding, and sometimes it still felt as if you were talking about a stranger right now faced with the Fae. I appreciated the formality of it. There aren't many places a dragon shifter can exercise her powers without needing to worry about discretion. I suppose your people must at least know you've traveled up here, the Fae woman said. They'll be awaiting your return. We'll be back soon enough, Marco said. I restrained a frown. What was she getting at? Maybe it was time we started asking more of the questions. I didn't want to tell her much about Mom, but she might know things I didn't. My mother came up here at least once in the last several years. I said she liked to visit the mountains too. I don't suppose you passed by her? Then the Fae woman pursed her lips. I can't recall the last time I saw any dragon shifter in these heights. I can ask my companions if they have more knowledge. That was an incredibly vague answer, and if she could tell the alphas were alphas just by sensing it, surely she picked up on the marks Mom had left behind on the walls. Maybe she just assumed we'd already seen those. It sounds as though you're more familiar with this mountain than we are in general, Aaron said. Is there anything we should know for safe passage from here on? The Fae woman's mouth curled into another smile, but this one looked even chillier than the last. You're the 5 most powerful shifters alive. I'm sure there's nothing on this mountain that could threaten you. I suppose I shouldn't delay you in your journey any longer. We are moving on now, so I doubt our paths will cross again. Thank you for your rogue cleanup services, Marco said. Our pleasure, the Fae woman replied, without any hint of irony. She stepped backward to where a thin stream of sunlight penetrated the cave ceiling. With a quick leap, her form wavered and vanished into the glow. Should we be worried? I asked, staring up toward the sliver of daylight. Was she still here, only invisible, or could we assume she'd completely left? I didn't want to talk too freely in case it was the former. We'll just have to wait and see, Aaron said a little grimly. Let's keep moving while we have the light. 5 Ren. Someone's mouth was moving over my bare skin, searing it with hot breath and the graze of his teeth. My breath was already coming in sharp pants. He kissed his way down my throat, between my breasts and over my belly. His tongue scorched me everywhere I touched. His fingers trailed down my sides, even hotter than his mouth. He came to rest on my hips. Just as his face hovered over my sex, a thrill of anticipation and need tingled through me. I arched up encouragingly, and he took me in his mouth. His tongue slicked over my clit, sending sparks of bliss all through my body. I whimpered as he suckled hard. He was devouring my core, as if he meant to swallow me whole, and I was all for it. I moaned, weaving my fingers into the soft, smooth strands of his hair. A deeper need swelled inside me, and ached to feel him inside me, all of him, to know he was mine, and I was his now and forever. Please, I murmured, please. I tugged at his hair, and he raised his head. West's dark green eyes gleamed, his lips curled with a satisfied smile, and I jerked awake, my heart thudding. The chilly mountain air cooled my flushed face. The weight of the thick sleeping bag enveloped me. I was completely covered up and completely alone. It had only been a dream, but fuck, what a dream. My panties were sopping beneath the leggings I'd worn to bed, the ache of needle lingering deep in my belly. I had the urge to reach down and take care of things myself. But I wasn't actually alone in the tent. Marco lay on one side of me with a murmur of breath that reminded me of the little mews sleeping cats made. And West, the real West. I turned my head to look at him instinctively, as if to confirm. He was definitely still the grouchy, standoffish guy I'd had to badger into even kissing me the other day, although it had been quite a kiss when he'd given, and my eyes found his form in the darkness, lying on his side a couple feet away from me, but not asleep. Just enough of the light from the campfire outside seeped through the tent wall for me to make out his features, to see him staring right back at me. My pulse skipped again as our gazes met. I expected him to pull his way to roll over and shut me out. Instead, his eyes stayed locked with mine. They didn't hold the same lustful warmth as in my dream, but a tingle crept over my skin all the same. His expression was tense, but I also saw the same hunger I had when he looked at me naked after my shift, as if he were just a hair's breadth from reaching out and yanking me to him, as if he'd woken up from the exact same dream I had. Suddenly, I was sure that was what had happened. I could smell his arousal in the air, a waft of piney musk, but he was fighting it. I wet my lips, and his gaze twitched down to my mouth before I could decide what to do about this weird but also tempting moment. Marco stared at my other side. He scooted closer and nuzzled the back of my neck, someone feeling the need for a little middle of the night action. He murmured it in his language voice. I guess it wasn't just West's arousal. Sensing the air, my nerves hummed with anticipation. I needed something that was for sure. I arched into Marco encouragingly, and he kissed the crook of my jaw. The zipper of my sleeping bag hissed as he eased it down for better access. I tipped back my head to offer more of my neck to him. Marco branded me with his hot mouth, drawing his body against mine. His hand traveled up under my shirt. He groaned when his fingers brushed over my unconfined breasts. He stroked them skillfully, tracing pleasure all through my chest, and I whimpered. My gaze slid back down to meet West's again. He was still watching. His pupils had dilated, and I could hear the quickening of his breath in time with mine. My awareness of his desire turned me on even more. I gasped as Marco pinched one of my nipples. "Tell me what you want, princess," he said huskily. "Anything at all, it's yours." I didn't think I'd ever wanted anything more than for West to cross that gap between us and add his mouth and hands to the mix. Just the thought of it made me twice as wet between my legs. In that instant, my hormones overrode common sense. I reached out my arm toward West to beckon him over. Before I'd even finished the gesture, West flinched. His gaze snapped away. "Don't," he said, his voice thick with strain. He shoved off his sleeping bag and threw himself onto his feet with a slap of the tent flaps. He stalked out. Marco chuckled under his breath. "He'll come around, princess, especially after he sees how good the rest of us have it." But don't worry, I can make you see stars all by myself," he rolled me toward him and caught my mouth with his. The heat of his kiss washed over me. It was hard to think much about West. When I had this much man right in front of me, I kissed Marco back, letting all my need and desire spill into the places where our bodies touched. He let his hands slip lower, teasing over my stomach and tracing the waist of my leggings. When I kissed him harder, he dipped his hand right under the fabric. He kept my sex grinning against my mouth as I moaned. His mouth claimed mine again, his tongue tangled with mine. His fingers stroked over the sensitive folds between my legs. With increasing pressure, I clutched him, shivering with pleasure, riding his hand. "That's right, Princess," Marco murmured. "That's my girl." He kept up his gentle caresses as he kissed his way down to my chest and tugged my shirt up with his other hand. His breath spilled over my bare skin. He swirled his tongue around my breast before sucking the nipple into his mouth. A little cry of pleasure burst from my lips. I felt ready to explode. "You taste so good, I need to taste you everywhere." Marco gave my breast one more swipe, and then Dr. Lower. I whimpered in dismay when his hand left my sex. But it was only to ease my leggings down. A second later, he lowered his face between my legs like West in my dream. Fragments of that imagined intimacy darted through my head as Marco swirled his tongue over my clit. I gasped, arching up, and he looked lower, teasing my opening. Carried on the rising wave of bliss, I almost felt as if both he and West were there, my dream and reality merging into one. The ache in my belly came back twice as strong. My hips bucked, wanting more, wanting everything. I gripped Marco's hair, but he didn't release his claim on my pussy. He waved my clit until I was trembling, one finger then to tested my wetness, and then slid up inside me. I moaned again as the pleasure rose higher. Marco nipped me just hard enough to send a brief spark of pain through the pleasure, and that tipped me over the edge. I came shattering against his mouth. The orgasm washed over me, and the stars Marco had promised flashed behind my eyes. Marco smiled and kissed my sex again. As my tremors subsided, he eased up beside me, pulling my body flush against his and brushed his lips against mine. My tart flavor lingered in his mouth. I pressed closer to him, sated and yet still hungry. The hard length of him bulged against the fly of his pants. His hips rocked against me as his hands caressed my ass, sending fresh sparks all through my nerves. It would be so easy to peel off his pants and open myself to him, to solidify our mate bond and tie us together for life. When Marco mumbled against my mouth, I heard the wanting in his voice. An awful lot of me wanted it too. But as we rolled with him on top of me, now my gaze dropped to West's empty sleeping bag. This whole encounter had started with the Volf shifter with him and that scorching dream, and here I was getting down and dirty with Marco instead. Could I really know what I wanted right now? In the heat of the moment, the mate bond, it was for life. When I accepted it with each of the guys, I wanted to be absolutely sure, no room for doubts, no misguided lust clouding my thoughts. Marco adjusted himself over me so our bodies aligned perfectly. His erection pressed between my legs. I was drowning in the heat of him. I touched his cheek and eased him back after another kiss. He grinned down at me, his eyes so bright with longing that guilt twisted my stomach. The grin faltered when he took in my expression. "Princess," I drew in a shaky breath. "I'm sorry, I don't think I'm ready." "Not quite yet." He couldn't hide the disappointment that darted across his face before he schooled it into his usual cool nonchalance. He nozzled my hand, his smile coming back. "Ran, I'm not going to push, but you understand why I want you so much, don't you, my lovely princess of flames? You have no idea how much you mean to me already." The soft words brought a flutter into my chest. "You hardly know me," I couldn't help pointing out. "I know you enough." He bent his head close to mine, not kiss me, but to whisper by my ear. The rich, spicy coffee scent of him filled my nose. My mouth practically watered. "I know you're the most determined woman I've ever met," he said. "I know you'll do anything to defend the people you love. I know you've got a sharp enough tongue to rival mine. Sometimes I've never cared about anyone as much as I care for you. You can take that as a promise." The flow of his words against my ear left me tingling. He moved above me, and I almost whimpered at the feel of his cock still hard against me. My fingers gripped his shoulders. He rocked against me gently, sending shivers through my core. It was getting hard to think again. So much of me was screaming for another Release, I hope you have at least a few positive feelings about me, Marco added. Lately, I think that should be pretty obvious, I muttered. But that flippant answer didn't feel good enough. It's not about you, this whole situation, just it still doesn't feel normal to me. I've never committed to anyone, let alone for guys, in just a few days. You grew up knowing it'd be like this. I can't wrap my head around the idea. That fast, I know, princess, I know. He still then kissed my cheek. Wait, I just can't help wanting to start our lives together as quickly as possible now that I found you. My throat tightened a little at the emotion in those words. I'll be ready soon, I said. I'm getting there, at least I hoped I was. The feelings in my chest suddenly felt a lot more tangled. Last was easy love. Was I really going to be able to handle giving my whole heart to all four of these guys, as drawn to all of them as I was 6? Marco, I've been through plenty of pain in my life, you named it. I'd probably been there at least once, but I'd never experienced any torture quite as exquisite as waking up next to my mate, who still wasn't entirely my mate. Ren was still sleeping. Her expression was soft, and her hair a massive dark brown waves spilling from the top of the sleeping bag. I wanted to kiss her gently, like the angel she looked like, and I also wanted to pull her to me and ravish her until she agreed to finishing what we'd started in. Come so close to ending last night. My cock hardened just remembering the feel of her smell flooding my nose, her taste filling my mouth, the little cry she'd made as she came. I could take her even higher than that. All I needed was for her to give me the chance. It was going to take time for her to come around. That was understandable, what we'd all been waiting for across nearly 2 decades. She'd only had a few days to process. I was a feline, wasn't I? I knew how to give a person space, as painful as that space might be. I stretched on the hard ground, willing my erection to subside. That fey woman, thinking of her, was a good mood killer. I bet if she touched my dick it'd shrivel up like a fallen autumn leaf. There, that did the trick. All cooled down below, I peeled off the sleeping bag and ducked out of the tent. Nate had a pan sizzling over the fire. We brought a good stock of cured bacon, but even though it didn't need cooking, it tasted twice as good fried. The salty, meaty smell tickled into my nose. My stomach grumbled. I wasn't normally much of a hiker, and all this mountain climbing had left me ravenous. If I couldn't devour Ren the way I wanted, at least I could have my way with breakfast wares. Are Wolf and Eagle? I asked, sinking down by the fire and stretching out my legs. The smoke curled up toward a small gap in the cave ceiling above us. And how long until you surrender some of that bacon? You can have it now, Nate said with a hint of a smile. The bear looked more relaxed this morning. Even though he'd been up the second half of the night on guard duty, he flipped a couple of strips off the pan with surprising grace and tossed them to me. I snatched them out of the air and dug in. The hot, crispy pork seared my tongue, but the sting was worth it. Biscuits, Nate added, tossing over the bag. The doughy lumps didn't appeal half as much as the meat, but they made for good energy. At the start of the day, Nate dug into one of his own as he tossed a few more strips of bacon onto the pan. Aaron and West are taking a quick survey of the area farther down the cave in both directions. Aaron didn't want to be careless after yesterday because of the fey woman or because of the weasel. Both were reason for concern. I tore a biscuit in half and shoved the rest of my bacon inside to form a rough sandwich. In a minute I'd gulped that down and was reaching for another. Nate gave me an amused look when I started eyeing the pan again. We all need to eat, he said. Ryan is still sleeping. I nodded. I figured the princess deserved her beauty rest. Nate bristled slightly, as if he thought I'd meant that remark as an insult. She's been holding up well. Of course she is, I said, waving him down. Ren had been even less prepared for this kind of physical strain than the rest of us, and she shifted into dragon form twice. That first day I'd have let her sleep until noon without judging if I could have, but we did need to get to the end of this journey soon. The biscuits were already getting a tad bitter with staleness. Wes was sleeping by the fire when I got back from sentry duty, Nate said with a prodding tone instead of in the tent. I shrugged. You know how Wolf Boy is. He still got issues with our Princess of Flames being anywhere near his personal space. The K9 Alpha was an idiot. The maid we'd all been waiting our entire lives for had been right there in front of him, practically begging him to come to her, and he'd turn tail in the opposite direction. He had to want her just as much as I did. I couldn't understand that kind of self-denial at all. Footsteps sounded on the rocky ground. Aaron came into view, his thoughtful expression perking up at the smell of the food. He ambled over to the fire and grabbed a piece of bacon right out of the pan. Show off the eagle shifter as he hunkered down by the fire. What exactly had he done to make Ren choose him first, choose him, and still hesitate about the rest of us? I was at least that bird brains equal no reason for concern up ahead, he said. At least not from what I saw, not behind us either, West said, emerging from the shadows in the other direction. He flexed his neck with a crack of his joints. Let's eat and get going. Where's Ren? Coming, a muttered voice carried from the tent. Our dragon shifter pushed past the flap, running her fingers through the rumpled waves of her hair. Even barely awake and dressed in wrinkled clothes, she was the most gorgeous specimen of womankind I'd ever seen. I took her in, enjoying the eyeful. She lifted her head and sniffed bacon again. Take what you can get, Sparks, West said, his already gruff expression shuddering even more. Yeah, Wolf Boy had a few issues to work through. Too bad for him. That just left more room for me to make my moves. Ran ambled over. Oh, I'm not complaining. I'd eat nothing but bacon for the rest of my life if I wouldn't end up with scurvy. She sat down cross-legged between Aaron and me and hummed happily as Nate passed her a couple strips. Even the way she crunched into the bacon was sexy enough to get me half hard again. Fuck. This mate bond thing was brutal in the most tantalizingly torturous way. A much less pleasant sensation twisted in my gut. My body stilled. I frowned as my stomach gurgled and roiled. I didn't like the feel of that at all. What was going on with my innards all of a sudden? What's wrong, Marco? Aaron asked, being Mr. Eagle Eyes. Nothing, I said with the dismissive gesture. Just a little. I've been going to say it was just indigestion. But before I could get the words out, a feverish flush washed through my body. My stomach outright lurched, heaving up toward my throat. There was nothing I could do but spin around before I vomited the food I just eaten onto the ground. Ren, Marco knifed over with a sickly gurgle. I jumped to my feet, my pulse hiccuping. My fingers dug into the biscuit I'd just taken. The salty flavor of the bacon went sour in my mouth. The other guys sprang up to Aaron, ran to Marco's side. I'm fine, the Jaguar shifter protested right before he gagged. Again clutching his stomach, West eyed him, his stance rigid. Nate took a step toward him and stopped, his hand falling to his abdomen. A sudden sweat gleamed on his forehead. He's not fine, he said, and I don't think I am either. The food, West snapped. He dropped down by the pack we'd filled with our meal supplies, leaning close to take in a deep breath. He smelled the package of bacon, tossed it aside, and reached for the biscuits. As he pressed his nose to the bags, opening his eyes narrowed. He inhaled again, slow and careful. They're tainted, he said. I hardly had a chance to wonder how or what exactly that meant. Nate barged around the fire and smacked the biscuit I'd been holding from my fingers. I blinked at him, shaking my stinging hand. Sorry, he said, his mouth twisting. I couldn't let you. He staggered over to the cave wall and sank down. Aaron's head jerked toward West. What is it? How serious? Some kind of toxin, West said. He pulled out one of the biscuits and broke it open to take another careful sniff. A natural substance, not artificial, hard to pick up if you're not looking for it, which obviously was the point. They've been poisoned. I burst out. What are we going to do? How many of these did you eat? West asked Marco. A couple, Marco muttered. He wiped his mouth, his dark hair slanting over his hooded eyes. He kept his face averted, as if ashamed, as if he thought I'd feel anything other than concern and sympathy. Seeing my mates in this state, my hands balled at my sides. I only had one, Nate said by the wall. His voice strained. A shudder ran through his sprawled legs. They're not least very heavily, West said, to make it harder for us to notice. You're feeling the effects, obviously, but I'd be surprised if it's enough to kill you, Marco snorted. Oh, that's comforting. If he could still manage sarcasm, he couldn't be in absolute agony. But he was clearly feeling pretty wretched. His arm was tightly wrapped around his belly. I looked from him to Nate, wanting to be with both of them, comforting them at once. Who could have done this? Who would have wanted to do it? Do you think that weasel yesterday? West grimaced. There's a faint scent that says must lead to me. They all have that oily thing going on. I'd say he's our culprit, definitely. That answered the why. At least the rogues had wanted to attack us any way they could, and we didn't have to worry about more harm from that quarter. because the Fae had taken care of that enemy yesterday. But when could have he done it? We all ate biscuits yesterday morning, and we were fine. They've been in the pack since then, haven't they? Aaron nodded, and it hasn't been out of our sight. There were times when we weren't paying a lot of attention to the supplies, Nate pointed out while we were packing up the tent during the lunch stop. You'd think we'd have scented the weasel himself if he came back close. West set down the bag of biscuits, his eyes narrowing. It's almost as if he snuck around us by magic, isn't it? Aaron gave him a sharp look. We're better off not making accusations where we have no proof. No, West agreed, straightening up, but it's something to keep in mind. Magic. Did he think the Fae had helped the weasel shifter get to us? But even if they wanted to hurt us, why would they have killed their ally afterward and pretended to be ours? I wasn't sure if it was safe to ask. The Fae woman had said her people were on their way off the mountain, but if they'd resort to poisoning, we obviously couldn't trust anything they'd said. And the way she'd appeared out of nowhere, how could I be sure they weren't listening to our conversation right now? An eerie prickling ran over my skin. Marco pushed himself back toward the fire, away from the puddle of sick. Like Nate, he was sweating, his face grayed between the gleam of perspiration. His arm wobbled as it supported his weight, but his eyes were mostly clear. I knelt next to him, gripping his shoulder in a way I hoped showed how much I cared about him. You should rest until you feel better. I glanced over at Nate. You two, I don't want you making yourselves any more sick than you already are. My gaze moved to Aaron. He was the one who'd spent the most time studying. Maybe he'd gone through some medical books in his reading. Is there anything we can do to help them recover quickly? Aaron's bright blue eyes were solemn. Every poison has an antidote, but we're pretty short on supplies up here, and we can't be sure of exactly what poison it is. West, we brought the first aid kit from the car, didn't we? Do you have activated charcoal in there? West's gloom momentarily lifted. Probably. We've had issues with drugs among the team shifters, so we like to keep that on hand in case of an overdose. Let me find it. As he shuffled through the packs, I went to Nate's side. The bear shifter leaned his head toward me. When I touched the side of his rugged face, I'll be all right, he said a little hoarsely. The poison will just have to run its course. But we were so much weaker while two of my alphas could barely sit up. I nuzzled his arm, my helplessness tearing me up inside. My mates needed me, and there was nothing I could do. Even my dragon form couldn't burn the poison out of them. And of course Nate had to act all stoic, as if my worrying was a bigger problem than him being fucking poisoned. I grated my teeth. If that weasel shifter hadn't already been sizzled up by Fey magic, I'd have been tracking him down right now, and I wouldn't have stopped to ask questions either. A nice little dragon snack, that's what he'd have turned into. West hurried over carrying a jar of black powder. He scooped some onto a small spoon and offered it to Nate. It tastes like crap, but it'll help pull the poison out of your stomach. Nate gulped down the powder and made a face. He started to try to push himself onto his feet, and I caught his arm. No way, take it easy for once. I need you getting better, not running yourself into the ground. He eased back down, but hesitantly. We shouldn't stay here very long. There were other rogues that got away. They might still be following us, or others who want to do us harm, West murmured darkly. And we just lost a significant portion of our food supply, Marco put in. He'd stretched out on his back, his muscle chest rising and falling with halting breaths. Well, I guess this trick just got a lot more exciting. 7. When the open air tingled over my wings, I swooped across the mountainside, reveling in the glide of my dragon's body. After so long cooped up in the caves, the sense of freedom made me giddy. Part of me longed to flap those wings as hard as I could and soar all the way around the towering peaks. But I reined my impulses, and I wasn't out here to have fun. My sharp dragon eyes scanned the rocky terrain again. Aaron had been right to doubt the hunting possibilities up here. I hadn't spotted anything living at this level of the mountain. He was following me now in eagle form, conducting his own search while keeping me in view just in case I lost control of my shift. I didn't exactly like having a babysitter, but it was kind of comforting all the same. I hadn't gotten a lot of warning the last 2 times. I'd run out of energy and had to shift back. I swerved around to glide lower down the slope to where a few sparse trees and shrubs managed to cling to the rock. The deepening evening dark hid my immense scaled form from anyone who might have glanced up from the town below. All I could see of Sun Ridge was a faintly speckled glow amid the shadowed landscape between the mountains, while Marco and Nate had been recovering. West, who seemed to have the sharpest nose out of all of us, had gone through the rest of our food stores. Along with the biscuits, we'd had to chuck out a bunch of beef jerky and a bag of apples. My precious Doritos were safe, but they weren't going to get us very far, so while hunting wasn't proving very fruitful, we didn't have much choice but to try. Once we'd started walking again, slower to accommodate the weekend guys. We'd been lucky to find a gap in the ceiling wide enough for my dragon shape to fit through. It had been a tight squeeze. My attention jerked back to the present. A shadow had moved amid the sparse brush, a large hair hopping tentatively from one shrub to the next. Not much of a meal for five, but I'd take what I could get at this point. I swooped down, extending my forelegs. The hair froze at the sound of my descent. At the last second, it decided running might be a better strategy. Delayed. My talent foot snatched it up, one claw severing its neck to stop it from squirming, killing. It had been easier than I'd expected. Some natural instinct had taken over. I remembered what West had said the other night after he'd killed a deer. We're all predators here. And at the time I thought he was just talking about the alphas, but he could have meant me too. I didn't ever want to be used to killing things. My muscles were starting to twitch with the need to let go of this form. I'd held it for a while now, longer than the last two times, but I didn't want to push my luck. I shot up the mountainside toward the crevice. I'd emerged through air and circled around after me. A smaller rabbit in his own grasp. The prickling dug deeper into my muscles. My dragon's jaw clenched. I had to hold on. If I transformed back into human form out here on the mountain slope, totally naked, if we were too far from the cave, even Aaron wouldn't be able to get me back in time before I froze to death. And then there would be no Drake and shifters left at all. I pushed my wings through the air. It no longer felt so exhilarating. I spotted my salvation up ahead. A thin stream of smoke trickled up into the cold evening air. I plunged toward it. The rough rock edge scraped over my scales as I dove through. I transformed as I fell, hitting the ground on knees, already partly human. The impact jarred my bones, but I still had the hair, its thick fur soft between my clutched fingers. Nate hustled over with my clothes. The bear shifter was still moving more sluggishly than usual, but he'd regained a healthier color as the day had gone on. The charcoal West had given him and Marco seemed to have helped a lot. I hated to think what might have happened if they'd eaten more biscuits, or if we all had. I let Nate drape my jacket over my shoulders to fend off the worst of the chill, and then tugged the rest of my clothes on as quickly as I could. I was shivering. Before I was half done, I hurried over to the fire where Nate had already brought the hare and Aaron's rabbit. My ego shifter was just pulling on his shirt. The glimpse of his well-muscled chest. Seriously, what was that? An 8-pack disappearing under the fabric was enough to send a completely different sort of shiver through me. Okay, now I was warm. Marco was lounging by the fire, looking a lot less pained now too. But I knew the poison had hit him harder than it had Nate, probably because he'd gotten a bigger dose of it. His mouth still twisted a little when he bent over to grab the granola bar West tossed to him, and his joking didn't have quite the same lightness as it usually did. Those rogues had better not mess with us again, he said flippantly. I really have a bone to pick with them now, and a few I'd like to shove into various parts of their body. Nice sharp rib through the gut would be just the thing. West rolled his eyes. He leaned over to poke at the fire. We were getting low on wood too. I knew it had been too heavy for us to carry very much, and we hadn't been able to scavenge any to replenish our supply since we'd entered the caves. Maybe I'd need to make a different sort of trip above ground tomorrow morning. They obviously didn't do that much damage to you, West said to Marco. You're still shooting your mouth off as much as always. Marco gave him a baleful look. It takes a lot more than a couple of tainted biscuits to take down the leader of all feline kin. We don't know what they'll try next. Nate dug a knife into the hare's pelt to skin it. We'll have to stay extra alert on watch tonight. Do you think we really have to be worried about people other than the rogues? I ventured. I still wasn't sure how wise it was to mention the Fade directly. West hadn't done more than insinuate that they might. Be involved this morning. Aaron clearly realized what I meant. There are trees between all the major supernatural communities. He said attacking the leaders from one community unprovoked would bring about major consequences. It would be a huge risk if it could be proven who was involved. West muttered, just make it easier for someone else to do the job and you can get off scot-free. Have relations between the different communities been so bad they'd want to get rid of us? I asked. Aaron shook his head. I wouldn't have thought so. It's possible, but West is jumping to the most dire explanation. Not the most likely. Easy to say when you can just fly on out of here if the going gets tough. Eagle Boy Marco said. His tone was teasing, but I saw Aaron's jaw twitch. He told me a few nights ago how the other kin groups tended to see the avians as something lesser, and therefore to see him as the least important of the alphas. He didn't buy into that belief, but off-the-cuff comments like that must still carry a bit of a sting. I knew he'd never leave us behind, no matter how tough the going got, except he wouldn't. I said, we're all doing the best we can. The best we can would be to get out of this mountain already. West said, I don't suppose you have any idea how much longer that is going to take. Sparks. I grimaced at the nickname, but my gut nodded at the same time. I'd still been feeling the internal tug toward whatever was waiting for us, but I had no idea how much farther we had to go. If I could have just raced ahead on my own, but that would be stupid and exactly what anyone trying to get rid of me would want. These attacks had always been about the dragon shifters first. The rogues wanted my line eliminated. My alphas had only gotten hurt because they stood in the way. It can't be that much farther. I made myself say there can't be that much more mountain and tomorrow, Marco, and I should be able to keep up the usual pace. Nate said. He set the skinned carcass over the fire. The flames licked up over the meat, sending a mouth-watering roasting scent into the air. There's no point in doing over things we can't know. We just prepare as well as we can, and we'll be ready for whatever happens. I wish I could feel the same easy confidence. I couldn't even be sure of holding a shift for more than 10 minutes at a time. But if West's question had been a little harsh, he wasn't wrong. The four of them were here because of me, because of this quest Mom had sent me on. If Marco and Nate had gotten more than just sick, that would have been on me to my fingers itch with nothing around to pilfer. Everything around me was an unappealing target because it was all too close to being mine. I realized somewhere during the last few days my mind had completely adjusted to the idea that the four guys around me and I shared an inexplicable connection, one that made them part of my inner circle, which until now had included only me, my mom, and Kylie. There was no relief in stealing from the people I trusted to be on my side. The unease stayed coiled in my belly all through dinner. My hunger had faded, but I forced a decent portion of rabbit down, followed by a granola bar, just to keep my energy up. Marco and West took the first guard shift. I went to help Aaron set up the tent while Nate finished securing the campsite. As my fingers grazed Aaron's here and there as he brushed past me to fix one of the poles, another kind of hunger started to well up inside me, the need to feel that connection between us, to remind myself that it was right for them all to be here with me. When we ducked inside, I took his hand and pulled him down to sit on top of my sleeping bag with me. He gathered me in his arms and kissed me in that moment, with his lips parting mine and the heat of his body against me. All my worries faded. I was here where I was meant to be, with the men I was meant to be with. I eased us down onto our sides on the padded surface, wanting to feel him against me from head to toe. He hooked his arm around me, his thumb teasing over the bare skin of my back just beneath my shirt. I quivered with pleasure and kissed him harder. The tent flap rasped. I eased back from the kiss and glanced up. Nate had come in his tall frame, stooped to avoid toppling. The tent heat flared in his dark brown eyes as he took us in, but he hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue forward or head back out. Suddenly, just having Aaron with me didn't feel like enough. I needed more. I needed to be completely wrapped up in the bond of desire and affection that ran between all of us. I'd almost given into that urge with Marco and West yesterday. The guys thought it was normal. Why should I hold back? I drew in a breath and held out my hand. A smile split Nate's face. He hungered down at my other side, pressing a kiss to the back of my neck, and just like that I was surrounded by warmth. The musky pepper of the bear shifter scent mingled with the salty tongue of my eagle I inhaled it deeply and pulled Aaron into another kiss. Two pairs of hands traveled over my body. Two sets of lips marked my skin. Aaron's tongue twined with mine. As Nate's nipped the crook of my shoulder, the bear shifter looped his arm over me to caress my breasts. Aaron's fingers traced over my waist and tugged my hips closer to his. The bulge of his erection pressed against me tantalizingly hard. I arched into it with a whimper. Nate eased up my shirt, and the eagle shifter pulled back to let the other alpha peel it right off of me. Then Aaron made quick work of my bra. I yanked at his own shirt, eager to see the hardened chest I'd only gotten a glimpse of an hour ago. He stripped it off, and Nate did the same with a chuckle behind me when they both slid closer again, the heat between us bare skin to bare. Skin was outright burning. Aaron claimed my mouth, cupping my bare breasts. At the same time, the peaks pebbled with a single touch. Nate started kissing his way down my spine. Every press of his lips sent an urgent pang of bliss through me. I moaned and squirmed, the desperation for release, any kind, whatever I could get building inside me. Nate paused at the small of my back, flicking his tongue over the sensitive skin. There I whimpered encouragingly. Aaron teased my nipples into even stiffer peaks with a swivel of his thumbs. Every sweep of them across those tips stoked the flame of need inside me. Then Nate's hand slipped over my ass in between my legs. I let out another moan, pressing into his touch. My panties felt soaked through. Could he feel how turned on I was even through my pants? Aaron dipped his head to suck the tip of my breast into his mouth. Nate stroked my sex. A gasp slipped from my lips. The sensations of their combined attentions were overwhelming, but oh so good. I rocked my hips, and my clit brushed Aaron's erection. All at once I couldn't stand the longing anymore. I wrenched at his slacks, fumbling with the button. I yanked the pants partway down. Aaron groaned as I palmed his cock, the silky hard length of him pulsing against my hand. Serenity, he murmured. It sounded almost like a question, one I knew the perfect answer to. Inside me I sat around, another whimper. Now the two guys tugged down my pants together. Aaron rolled me over so I was facing Nate. As the bear shifter leaned in to kiss me on the mouth, my eagle stroked me between the legs from behind as Nate had before. He hummed happily as his fingers tested the moisture there. He dipped them into the hot slick center of me, and I gasped against Nate's mouth. Then the head of Aaron's cock rubbed over my opening. I shuddered with pleasure, on the verge of losing it already. He eased inside me with a slow, steady thrust that sent a flare of pleasure through me. I never felt so complete as when he failed me. But Nate was still there with me, kissing me through my moans, caressing my breasts, and then reaching down to massage my clit. Aaron plunged deeper into me from behind, holding my hips to steady them. The pressure inside me swelled with each pump of his cock and each motion of Nate's hands until it was almost unbearable. I had to give more of it back. I groped for Nate's jeans. He undid the fly with one quick movement. His hips jerked toward me as I slipped my hand inside. My fingers closed around his cock just as hard and even bigger than Aaron's to match the bear shifter's massive frame. I moaned just at the feel of it.